The story begins with several carriages stop and some soldiers starting to prepare for a battle. An army of beings resembling goblins with improvised weapons rushes towards the carriages to loot them. However, all the mercenaries there stand in defense to fight against the monsters. And then the two groups charge at each other, with the only thing remaining being a sea of blood from all the beings involved in the fight. A bearded nobleman, watching the battle while smoking a cigar, complains because these attacks were happening day after day. Distracted, the poor fat man does not notice that some beings were gathering behind him to attack. When the man realizes it, he can no longer react, but for his salvation, a person with long hair charges at the beings to counterattack. The goblin tries to hit the long-haired man, but is immediately cut in half without even seeing it. With a sword in one hand and a shield in the other, the man defends against another monster's attack. He uses his shield to counterattack, hitting the goblin's head and throwing it far away. But despite this, there is still an enraged goblin charging at our protagonist, aiming to kill him and avenge his companions. The irritated man stops using his shield as defense, leaving his hands free, and immediately grabs the poor goblin's skull. With one hand holding the monster's skull and the other holding its arm, he exerts force to tear it apart. And then, in an extremely cruel manner, the man begins to rip the beast in half, while the nobleman from before merely watches. In shock, the nobleman is incredulous that the man had torn a goblin in half with just his bare hands. With his face stained with the creature's blood, the boy continues to stare at the beast's body while the nobleman asks who he was. But before all this happens, we see a man working on a computer, and our protagonist begins to explain that since he was young, he always liked games and that it was not a sin. The world of games had various elements like the case system and poverty where the nobility reigned, betrayals and murders of close people or even strangers, and last but not least, numerous monsters and ferocious beasts that only think of destroying and killing. Our protagonist introduces himself as Dallin, and his appearance is of a tall man with long hair dressed in medieval clothes. However, he reformulates and says that his real name was something else while he remembers his life in his former world. But before stating his real name, the scene cuts, and we see the boy writing in a book with a quill already in another place. He was in a carriage while the sun shone on his face, and the boy continued writing something in his notebook. A bald and bearded man arrives and says it was time to change shifts, notifying Dallin. Dallin puts away his notebook, then asks if something had happened, and the man replies that no, everything was very quiet as not even a single goblin had appeared. They continue talking about the weather and why the creatures were no longer appearing while Dallin starts getting ready. However, the horse-drawn carriage passes over a stone, causing the bald man who was drinking to spit out his drink. Dallin finishes preparing and wishes his friend a good rest, then leaves. The man wipes the liquid he had spit out and the one in his mouth, only wishing Dallin good work. As the boy leaves the carriage, he is greeted with good morning by several people around. We see that the carriages from before are arriving at a huge city, and Dallin begins to explain that 2 years ago, he started the tutorial of this game. He informs that the starting point of this game is known as the Bastion of Humanity and was called the Labyrinth City Pasion. Looking at the huge castle and all the structures, the boy says that it was on a completely different level from what he saw through his computer screen. Walking towards the gates, the boy adds that it was a huge city with many people and also the only safe way to go to the underground labyrinth. Dallin says there is no other path but this one that allows avoiding the monsters appearing in the labyrinth, which holds numerous treasures buried inside. Concluding that moreover, at the lowest part of the labyrinth, there is an object called the Stone of Wish that grants a wish. He thinks that honestly this was probably the only way to return to his land, and to confirm if the stone really existed, he would need to descend to the end of the labyrinth. However, catching his attention, an unknown person calls him by his name from behind. The said person was the same noble from last time, who, upon being greeted by Dallin, said the boy didn't need to be so formal. As Dallin approached, it was noticeable that our protagonist was much taller than the man, and Bolkma mentioned that they were companions and thus didn't need formality. Our protagonist assumed that the man wanted something, and the noble was surprised, saying Dallin had a keen perception, which was why he liked the boy. With all of his elegance, Bolkma said he had something to offer and asked if Dallin would be willing to join his emporium as his personal mercenary. Hearing this, Dallin was somewhat confused because he thought he had never seen such an event in that game before. Bolkma said his merchant instincts told him that although there were numerous superhumans who flew and crawled in this labyrinth city, he was sure that our protagonist would soon be on the same level as them. The boy asked if the noble was trying to hire him before that happened, and the dwarf confirmed. He emphasized that this would also be advantageous for our protagonist, asking once more if the boy would accept the offer. However, unexpectedly the boy refused, and then the dwarf began to pull something from his jacket, saying he knew this would happen. The man took out a bag of coins, saying it was the commission fee, 15 shillings. Dallin was confused, noting that his commission fee was 10 shillings, and he even thought he would receive less since he joined halfway, but Bolkma said the rest was an investment. Bolkma concluded by saying he wanted to solidify his relationship with a talented warrior, and our protagonist smiled, hearing the man. To finalize the negotiation, the dwarf asked the boy not to ignore him in the future, and he accepted, saying it sounded good. The boy extended his hand to greet and say goodbye, saying he would see Dallin later. Dallin extended his hand, returning the gesture to the noble and smiling at him, realizing that the man truly seemed like a good person, and the conversation ended with a handshake. Later that day, when it was about to get dark and the sun was setting, we see several people walking through the streets of the Labyrinth City. Our protagonist was one of them, and the boy seemed confused, immersed in his thoughts, ignoring everyone around him. He recalled the offer the noble had made, thinking that during his gameplay he had never seen anything like it. The boy thought he had never seen such an event before, which meant that the game's events could change depending on his actions. Dallin concluded that it was a very tempting offer, but as soon as he arrived there, he already had something to do because it was all predetermined. The boy continued walking through various streets, alleys, and suburbs of the city. Our protagonist even passed through poorer areas and finally arrived at a place with a sign. The boy looked at the establishment and confidently said he had come to the right place, then walked to the door. Dallin opened it, and upon entering, we see it was a bar with many people talking and drinking. Some mercenaries were discussing their missions and laughing while celebrating. Others were stressed about something, taking out all their anger and hatred on the drink and alcohol, and some were already drunk, sleeping. Looking at the whole situation, surprisingly, Dallin was happy, saying this was definitely the place he desired. Walking and looking around, he began to explain that a little after the start of the game, but something caught his attention, and looking to the side, the boy saw something shiny that surprised him. Our protagonist opened a malicious smile, showing some sharp teeth upon seeing what he had seen. Looking at the bright light, he saw it was a kind of ghostly corpse that was translucent. The system screen appeared, saying the boy had discovered the pathetic soldier's corpse, and we see that the person had been killed there by dagger attacks. The system informed that if the boy collected the body, he could inherit the abilities as well as the skills and items of the dead person. Smiling and staring at it, our protagonist began to think, wondering what the best weapon to deal with that ridiculously difficult game would be. He extended his hand, and all the green energy began to flow into his arm, and the boy collected the corpse, saying he would reach the end of this game no matter what. We see our protagonist using the computer, saying he liked challenging games. While adjusting his peripherals, the boy mentions he enjoyed the controllability commonly referred to as physics, and for that reason, he got bored with very easy games. However, this game was difficult even for him as he stared at his monitor and watched his character get shredded by a huge ogre. Looking at the game over screen, he adds that the main character was weak, and besides that, the monsters were extremely strong. The world inside the game was heading towards ruin. Every allied NPC was either seduced by demons or busy trying to stab him in the back. Drinking energy drinks to stay awake day after day, he says he died about 100 times but was determined to see the end of this game one way or another. Then a system notification appears asking if the player would like to buy the selected items, giving the option of yes or no. Seeing this, our protagonist gets annoyed but says he would spend that money while wondering what kind of cursed game charges to reach the end. Then moving his mouse to the yes button and clicking, he adds that he would have uninstalled it if not for the amount of time he had invested in the game. But in his current life, the boy bangs a mug of meat against the table while sighing, saying he should have just uninstalled that game. Looking to the side, the boy stares at the translucent corpse on the floor while other people continue drinking in the bar. Still staring at the figure, the boy says that luckily he was sure other people couldn't see it. That was called downloaded content or hair, a feature where a new character could inherit the abilities of the main character who died in the last round. And for players who died hundreds of times, this opened up the possibility of infinite growth. Leaving some coins on the counter to pay for the drink he had consumed, the boy gets up saying there was just one flaw in that system. It was that you had to personally go to the place where a body died and collect the corpse yourself. As he stands up and faces the corpse, still hesitant and somewhat incredulous about everything that was suddenly happening in his life, the boy extends his hand. He uses the ability to collect the corpse, and then all the green aura that was around begins to move towards Dallin. Dallin starts being surrounded by all the green aura while observing all that happening to him. Absorbing the aura that surrounded him, his strength, proficiency, and everything he was entitled to begin to increase. However, something he didn't expect appears, and the boy gets a little confused looking in one direction. The system notifies him that he had discovered a skill called Dehaemon's Armed Combat and then informs what that skill did. Looking at his hand that had a purple energy ball, the boy closes it using this skill and wonders how that character had this ability. But ignoring this fact, the boy smiles, saying it was all great while thinking about the possibilities that would give him. The man says his business there was over and so he would leave, but person sitting at one of the tables turns their attention to Dallin. Next to his henchman and the crime boss, says he had never seen Dallin's face and that the boy seemed like a mercenary, so he asks what brought the boy there. The man asks Dallin if he knew the business ethics of that place, and the boy asks what he was talking about. Still a little drunk, the bandit says that the business ethics were a money fee that Dallin should transfer to him and Maroon, the manager of that inn. Maroon continues saying that as long as the man was there, he could eat and drink safely, and hearing that, Dallin interprets it as a threat. Our protagonist, hearing what the mercenary was saying, looks at a dagger in the same's pocket and recognizes it. Remembering the corpse he had just absorbed, the boy recalls that this was the bastard who had killed him before. However, to the bandit's misfortune, Dallin says that unfortunately he had no money to give, and the man gets irritated asking if the boy really had nothing. Maroon imposingly goes up close to our protagonist, staring at him with a murderous aura. His henchman next to him, a muscular bald man, tries to go after the man, but Maroon stops him saying that it was alright and he would let Dallin go. The bandit questions Dallin if the boy had paid for the alcohol, and the boy confirms. Trying to act the good guy, the boy says the boy should go his way, and he would make an exception and let the boy go. Dallin calmly turns to open the door, not noticing that behind him, Maroon has an extremely psychotic aura. The bandit begins to draw his dagger, and with a threatening aura, charges at our protagonist. The boy seemed unaware of what was coming, only looking ahead as he was about to open the door. However, turning with an even more frightening aura, Dallin says he already knew about it and counterattacks the man. Outside the bar, people are going about their lives normally as they walk the streets that night. When everyone least expects it, the bar door opens and Maroon comes flying out from our protagonist's strike, ripping the door off and being thrown far away. The bandit, upon being thrown, hits his head and back against the wall on the other side of the street, falling to the ground and becoming dazed. Dallin, while cracking his neck, says he wouldn't fall for that failed tactic twice and curses the bandit. Still somewhat dazed and irritated, Maroon orders all the bandits inside the establishment to attack, and thus several armed people surround Dallin. The bandits, seeing the size of our protagonist, question whether he was really a normal person and if he had come from somewhere up north. The boy feels somewhat embarrassed, just scratching his face and looking around at all his pursuers. However, showing a darker side, the boy smiles, thinking there was a new skill and that this was a great time to test it. Without any fear, the boy drops his sword and shield on the ground, cracking his knuckles and intending to fight with bare fists. In a haughty and mocking manner, he makes a signal indicating that all the bandits could attack him, provoking them. Seeing the man's attitude, everyone charges at the boy, stating he was arrogant, and then advances against him. One of the bandits wielding a small blade leaps at our protagonist, saying the boy should die. But Dallin was merely concentrating a purple aura in his hand, waiting for the bandit to come into the lion's den. Then, when the man was about to hit him, he opens his fist one last time, closing it immediately afterward and striking the bandit's stomach. With the strong impact, the man is instantly repelled, being thrown meters away, already unconscious and probably dead. Seeing that, the other bandits, even finding it frightening, immediately charge at Dallin, and two of them have two blades ready to kill the boy. A bald man tries to attack with a sword, but the boy quickly dodges and then counterattacks, throwing the man away. The other bandit manages to land his attack with a wooden club, but realizes the club broke without leaving a scratch on his opponent. The bandana-wearing man, seeing it had no effect, wonders how a human's body could be as hard as iron while becoming worried. Dallin takes advantage of this distraction and also strikes the man with the back of his fist in the belly, knocking him out immediately. Seeing the bandits charging at him, our protagonist does only one thing. He smiles wickedly because he knew he could win. Maroon, who was completely beaten on the other side of the street, gets irritated, saying he pays the bandits to obey, so they should finish that guy immediately. Even hesitating upon hearing their boss's order, a blonde man immediately attacks Dallin from behind, trying to stab the boy with a blade. However, before he could see it, Dallin immediately spins his body, hitting his opponent's chin squarely with his heel. And while his partner fell to the ground, another bandit charges to attack the boy with a dagger. However, this time Dallin manages to defend himself just in time, creating a dust cloud that makes it impossible to see anything for a few seconds. When the dust settles, we can see that Dallin managed to catch the man's dagger with his own hands, injuring his fist in the process. Immediately, while preventing his attacker's movement, the boy retorts with a full punch to the guy's face, who wondered how he had caught the dagger with his hand. Upon receiving the impact of the blow, the man also goes rolling backward, meters away, already unconscious. Dallin seems unhappy, complaining that it was crap, also wiping the dust off his chest. Looking at the bodies of the defeated bandits around him, he explains he was only trying to grab the man's wrist. That must have happened because the skill proficiency was low. Seeing his stats, Dallin realizes his skill Dehaemon's armed combat had only increased by 1% proficiency, saying the game was damn hard. Looking back, a bald person appears, asking the boy what he had done, catching his attention. The bartender accuses Dallin, stating that the boy was beating people up in broad daylight, and that even if he was a mercenary, it was not allowed. However, our protagonist had no patience for conversation, and thinking that the man was threatening him at this point, the boy draws an axe. The bartender continues complaining, saying that if the guards found out about this, he wouldn't get away unscathed, and before he could realize it, an axe flies in his direction. The bald man only manages to see the object hitting near his head, becoming completely terrified. Our protagonist then apologizes, saying that it had slipped from his hand by accident. He walks up to the bald man, removing the axe that had gotten stuck in the wood, and the boy remains nervous. With a murderous aura and the axe in his hands, he asks the bartender what the man was saying. At night, near a cabin, we see Dallin tossing a bag of gold into the air. The boy says that before threatening someone, you should know who your enemy is, and since the guy was the innkeeper, he had made a lot of money. As he walks through the city streets, he adds that with this, he could stay in a good place without worrying about anything. Already in a few meters away, the receptionist welcomes our protagonist, saying that this was the Sword and Shield Inn. The man asks the boy how long he plans to stay because this inn even offers discounts depending on his mercenary rank. Dallin then says he would stay for a week and pulls out his silver necklace from his pocket, informing that he was a silver rank mercenary. The receptionist explains that since he was silver rank, breakfast and lunch would be completely free, but dinner would be extra, and the price of the bowl was 7 shillings. Looking at the bag of coins, the boy feels somewhat disappointed, thinking that it was still expensive. However, with few options, he leaves the coins on the counter and then heads to his room, number 412. Upon arriving there, the boy removes all of his armor and weapons, placing them on his bed. The boy goes to the window to look at the moon in the sky and says that this was the true beginning because the most important thing before completing the game was survival. Dallin continues immersed in his thoughts, thinking that to prevent this world from collapsing, he would have to become stronger, and for that, he would need money and experience. But unfortunately, with his current equipment and skills, that would be practically impossible. He needed money to buy good equipment and had to level up to use the hair skill. Thanks to his countless rounds, the corpses of his characters are scattered throughout the entire continent, and this would allow him to evolve exponentially. Clenching his fists, determined with his desire, the boy concludes that if he collected all the corpses, he could become extremely stronger than before. While imagining the creatures in that world, he notes that time was short, and he would have to prepare as quickly as possible. Thinking more deeply, the boy tries to find a special mission where he can earn money and collect corpses, simultaneously exploring the country. The boy finishes by saying that for this, he would have to meet the owner of the nest the next day. In another place, you can see the establishment with a logo of a raven. Inside this place, everything is illuminated by a purple light, while on a table there are various equipment, books, and magical potions. A beautiful girl rests part of her face on her hand while she says the name Dallin. Reading some papers, we see that the girl was sitting in a chair near a table, reading a specific paper with information about our protagonist. The next day, the sun finally rises, shining on the whole hotel and other apartments in the Labyrinth City. The man in charge of the hotel reception wishes our protagonist a safe journey, and the boy quickly leaves the place. Looking around and still a bit confused, the boy asks himself if he should go now or wait for a more appropriate moment. He starts walking through the streets and suburbs of the city, heading to the location he wanted to visit. After some walking, he finally sees the Raven logo and says it looks like he has arrived. Looking at the establishment, everything was completely run down, even overtaken by vines that were growing, and Dallin remarks that it was very neglected. Entering without asking anyone, the boy asks if there was anyone there, and it's possible to see that it looked like a bar illuminated by a purple magic crystal. Searching the establishment, Dallin notes that the door was open, but the owner of the nest didn't seem to be there. Something catches his attention, and he diverts his gaze to a door, saying it might be an uninvited guest. Behind the door, the same girl from the previous day was hiding the crossbow, and when the boy notices this, he says he has to clear up the misunderstanding. The boy goes to the door he entered and knocks with a secret code that only he and a few specific people knew. Hearing this, the girl remains silent for a while, then sighs and realizes what it is. Before opening the door, she asks how many times she has to say it, and as she opens the door, she says that outside business hours, one should only come if it's urgent. Upon seeing our protagonist, she notices that the boy is much taller than her and comments that she has never seen him before. Sighing, the boy says that the girl needs to expand her customer base to do well in business, as this place should be thriving, and the girl remains silent. Smiling the hint of mockery, she explains that she is quite capable and that the boy talks a lot for a customer from the north. She rephrases and asks how a savage dares to hint at someone like her, then asks if the boy understands, and Dallin confirms. The boy says it wouldn't be good if he were just a savage who migrated at the age of 2, and the girl is a bit confused by the phrase. He explains that he was civilized from an early age, and unlike an informant, she wasn't very good at foreign languages. Hearing this, the girl laughs despite trying to hold it back, saying the boy is a disappointment. The girl apologizes, commenting that she didn't expect to be fooled in such a gentlemanly manner. She turns around, smiling, and walks back to where she was, saying that since our protagonist is a customer, he will be served tea. As she turns, our protagonist notices the girl holding a crossbow and feels a bit nervous, sweating. He thinks that his chest was almost pierced, and with a knowing smile, the girl simply ignores him. Inside, the girl serves tea to Dallin, saying that even if he has heard about her, they should introduce themselves. She introduces herself as Sienna, stating that she works as a simple informant for the Raven's Nest, but is actually the owner of the place. The boy introduces himself as Dallin, saying he heard that he could accept various types of missions there. As she sits across from him, the girl confirms that he can take missions if he wants, but asks how the boy discovered that place. The boy replies that it was Bulkma who told him, and he also said that if she offers alcohol, he could drink, but if she offers tea, not to drink it. Irritated, the girl says that the man's tongue is too loose and asks if our protagonist saved his life, to which the boy says it was something like that. She explains that the code the boy used to knock on the door is something only truly close people know, so she tried to take precautions. The boy says that collateral damage is too great for a simple concern, but changing the subject, the girl asks if he wants a mission. She explains that even with everything, she still doesn't know the boy, whether close to Bulkma or not, so this is the first time they're meeting. And for now, the only thing the girl can do is give trivial missions, things that wouldn't have much impact on her business even if the boy fails. Smiling, the boy says it's okay since this is their first meeting, and the girl also smiles. Smiling, the girl says she should witness the abilities of the almighty warrior who tore apart a goblin with his bare hands. In another place, in a more remote part of the city resembling a slum, Dallin is seen reading some information on a flyer he received. He says that the girl is like a fox and that "I don't know you yet" talk was all lies. From the moment he arrived in the city, the girl already had information on who he was before he even thought of going there. After some walking, the boy steps into a part of the city's sewer and notices something. That was the lower street in the Bronze Territory's outskirts, and realizing he was in the right place, the boy starts to analyze. It seems there was an incident of missing people on that street, and that's why he received the mission to go there. Apparently, several disappearance cases have been occurring over an entire month in the same place, the entrance to Low Street. The boy begins to enter and search the area, while it is also explained that these incidents happen every 3 to 5 days. Recently, however, a young man disappeared, so the criminal seems to be getting bolder. Our protagonist then enters the sewer. Looking around, Dallin comments that it was written that the last disappearance happened there, and so the boy begins to investigate. Something catches his attention, and looking ahead, he sees the shadow of a monster talking about its stomach. The creature resembled a human but was walking on all fours and acting like an animal. Dallin then draws his shield and sword, preparing for combat, but something catches his attention when he sees the monster. He realizes that this humanoid creature, which resembled a rat, was the bastard that had devoured one of his bodies. The system notifies that Dallin had discovered the body of the hunter who was devoured as a form of test. The system also hints that our protagonist could inherit the bodies that were eaten or absorbed by someone by defeating the target that consumed it. Dallin faces the beast and notices that the monster has various veins on its back and a monstrous appearance. Seeing this, the boy smiles, saying he wouldn't have imagined finding his target so quickly. The boy assumes he's lucky, and the notification explains that if he defeats the target and absorbs it, he will acquire the powers of the corpse the monster ate. Raising his shield to defend himself, the boy comments that the monster is either a low-level half-monster or a low-level boss. Recalling his first battle against the beast, he notes that the rat originally had the size of an ogre and could easily destroy buildings. The creature, in a frightening and terrifying manner, says it didn't have much to eat today and was hungry since the small meals no longer affected its stomach. Taking a battle stance, Dallin comments that since it's the beginning of the game, it seems this creature is still developing and unfinished. Realizing this, our protagonist says it's better this way since he wouldn't face the monster at its full strength, making things easier. With a wicked smile, Dallin says he can cut the monster down before it reaches its strongest level. Irritated and already without human consciousness, the beast, the furious eyes and teeth, charges our protagonist and his life. It runs towards Dallin with its sharp and gigantic claws, ready to tear him apart, trying to attack the boy. However, Dallin is already prepared and easily dodges the attack by stepping back. He takes advantage of the stop to quickly strike his opponent with a kick to the stomach. The beast is thrown meters away by the attack, causing extreme damage to its belly. The monster hits its head against a sewer wall, becoming extremely injured and dazed. The creature turns to look at Dallin, and we see that the wound had crushed part of the beast's skull. However, a disgusting pink slime begins to form on the wound, regenerating it immediately. Seeing that his enemy had regenerated, the boy becomes extremely irritated, realizing the monster was still very strong. Quickly and without hesitation, the monster turns, ready to attack again, charging at our protagonist to kill him. However, without mercy, the boy uses his sword to try to cut the monster in half, but only manages to leave a wound in its stomach. The furious beast screams in pain while our protagonist realizes his attack hadn't been deep enough. Still groaning in pain, the half-human monster contorts, trying to hold the blood pouring from its stomach. Seeing his enemy kneeling before him, the boy raises his sword to finish him off and end the fight. Unexpectedly, with tears in its eyes, the monster begs our protagonist to stop because it was a person. Hearing this, the boy is completely confused, asking if the monster is okay now, and the person responds affirmatively. Crying, the beast says it didn't do it because it wanted to, while sobbing with tears streaming from its eye. He continues crying in despair, saying he didn't want to eat people and that a certain type of people put this beast inside him. Our protagonist asks who these people are. The monster responds that he doesn't know either and that they wore black robes and masks. The monster adds that these people used some strange potions and spells to transform him into this, and Dallin asks what the masks look like. Still crying over everything that happened, the beast explains that they were made of gold with a smooth surface and a large painted mouth. Hearing this, Dallin remembers something and says that as time passes, these people will give him more headaches. That's why he better be prepared to face them, and suddenly the monster starts to despair, asking how he could do this to people. The boy responds that it wasn't his fault, leaving the monster surprised and somewhat distressed. He adds that the people who turned the boy into that are the main culprits, so he doesn't need to worry. Dallin further states that he will make them all disappear, and for some reason, the monster starts to writhe. As he stands up, our protagonist thanks and sheaths his sword, thanking the monster once more. Still in tears and crying, the man says that those people fed him the flesh of his own daughter. And as the boy walks away, the monster continues talking about how they forced him to eat open-mouthed, consuming flesh, muscles, and intestines. But something changes in him, and his aura reverts to what it was, making him extremely aggressive and frightening, saying he is hungry. The beast lapses back into madness, and then tries to attack Dallin again, charging at the boy while his back is turned. Realizing what had happened, the boy bites his lips, becoming extremely irritated, and draws his sword. Before the monster could reach him, as an act of saving it from this suffering, the boy turns and uses his sword to finish it off. The beast's head instantly flies meters away while the half-human body falls into the sewer water. The system notifies that the boy had eliminated the monster that had swallowed his corpse, and thus he had discovered a new body. Dallin observes his former corpse and the monster's body lying in the water, cursing the world while the system asks if he wants to absorb it. We return to the raven's nest when it was already late afternoon and the sun was starting to set. Inside, we see the beautiful girl asking our protagonist if he had returned to the inn. The boy enters the place with an irritated and downcast expression, so the girl asks if he wants a drink. Without much conversation, Dallin throws a bag that was in his hands on the table, stating that he had captured the man they were looking for. The woman opens the bag and, seeing what was inside, has a disgusted look but says nothing. Seeing this, she realizes that tearing a goblin apart wasn't a lie and says she now has no doubt that Bulpa's words were serious after all. Santa takes a bag of coins from behind the counter and says that anyway, he did a good job and thus pays the 15 shillings. With a somewhat embarrassed face, the girl says the boy completed the job faster than she expected, but that doesn't mean he'll get more. Still saddened by the situation he saw, the boy says that amount was more than enough for a single trip. He also pulls out another bag from his pockets and places it on the counter, leaving Sienna intrigued and questioning what it was. With a cold expression, he explains that what's in the bag are the belongings of the murdered victims, leaving the girl confused and somewhat scared. Looking at it, the girl questions what she should do since he was handing it to her, and Dallin explains that he wanted her to give it to their families. Dallin offers to pay, but the girl says she is not an informant who extorts money using some excuse, and the boy could keep the money she would make. Smiling more relieved as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders for the girl's kind act, Dallin thanks Santa. He turns and begins to leave, saying he will see her tomorrow, and the girl, irritated, responds that for the 10th time, he should come during business hours. Dallin retorts that he would think about it if she offered him a drink instead of tea to try to kill him. Proud and somewhat happy, she sighs while watching the boy leave, realizing he had a good heart. Watching all this, she asks if it was really serious, since this wasn't the action of a typical mercenary who only cares about himself. Santa also says that he doesn't seem like a man who would simply be driven by a sense of justice and be stupid, getting a bit interested while looking at the bag. The girl sighs once more, saying that he's a very interesting mercenary. She says she is sure Dallin is capable of everything she commands, and already at night, we return to the inn where our protagonist was. At the inn, the boy is writing something again in his notebook. We discover that it was Dallin's diary, and he was reporting that he eliminated a demi-demon that would later become a disaster and even recover a corpse. He activates his stats window, beginning to analyze it, seeing that he had already gained a new skill called night vision. Noticing that his stats had increased exponentially, the boy says that, as he thought, he should recover as many corpses as possible as quickly as possible. This is the cost if he wants to repair the future world scenario that is approaching. There are various situations that will happen soon, such as a coven of witches who will burn a city and kill many citizens. There's also the mystery of the cultists who are trying to do something and are hiding while conducting experiments and manipulating people. An army of vampires is invading the Empire, wanting to bring it to ruin and destroy it completely. And finally, the evil god, the worst being that exists, and the enemy of everything in that world. He remembers the monster talking about the masks of the people who did that to him. Dallin closes his diary with a bang, extremely irritated with the situation, standing up and saying he will do what he can for now. The secret cult society of Palacin, if left alone, will eventually become a presence that cannot be ignored. But before that happens, he opens a wicked smile and adds that he will dismantle them member by member and defeat them. The next morning, we see the Raven's Tavern, where our protagonist picks up his missions. Inside, a bartender is cleaning some glass cups when something behind him catches his attention. Dallin arrives and sits on a small chair in front of the counter, asking the bartender for a glass of whiskey. The man quickly nods and rings a bell near him, then hands our protagonist the drink, which he quickly consumes. However, surprising the boy, Sienna appears, asking how long he will ignore the instructions to come only during business hours. Dallin responds that if there's a customer and a bartender, it's business hours, and the girl says the boy is talking too much. Our protagonist asks the woman who he has to kill that day, but she replies that the boy isn't going to kill anyone. Sienna points to her office and says he needs to go in now because they need to talk about something. The boy is a bit hesitant, not understanding what the woman meant by talk. She turns and starts entering her office, saying that a specific job has come for a certain person. The girl calls him the low-path hunter and then enters her office, laughing. Inside the office, Dalen asks who this low-path hunter is and what the girl wanted to say about it. Sienna, while serving tea, asks if the boy didn't know that was his new nickname. Because he was running through the low paths and alleys, catching wanted people, that nickname was given to him. Sienna adds that it's no wonder he earned that nickname, while Dalen remembers the missions he's been doing these days. The woman also says that he spent almost every day of the last week doing the work that others avoid because it's dirty and dangerous. Dalen retorts, saying that there must be many other bounty hunters there besides him, but the girl replies that he was standing out. Changing the subject, the man asks about the job he received, and the woman turns, going to the wall and picking up some papers. With papers in her hands, she shakes them, smiling, saying that it's his present. Reading, he looks somewhat surprised and says the phrase "Magic Tower," confused by what he's reading. Sienna confirms his suspicions, stating that the Magic Tower of El Gaia's in the Fine Silver Zone had hired him. The woman clarifies that she's not speaking for all of El Gaia's but for a specific, highly important mage. Dalen becomes even more confused, saying he's only been active for a week, so how did the Magic Tower know his name? The girl replies that one of her clients with high connections must have recommended him. Sienna says that to get the attention of the Magic Tower's scouts, Dalen must have had an encounter with someone of high rank, asking if the boy met someone of high rank. However, Sienna snaps her fingers, saying that someone comes to mind when she thinks of that. A silent commander of the Bronze Guards Company, and hearing that, Dalen agrees, saying that's a good guess. Sienna adds that this man has connections with the Magic Tower, and he is someone she would also want as an ally if she could. Dalen takes the tea to drink as well, asking for the details of the job. Already in the evening, Dalen is looking at something while being illuminated by the moonlight. The request was related to the missing disciple of the elderly mage, the only disciple of that ancient mage from the Magic Tower of El Gaia's, who disappeared in the city's sewers. As he walks through the city's streets, he says the reward would be a florin if he found any trace of him, and double that if he brought the boy back. Smiling, he adds that mages treat their direct disciples like their own children, and if everything went well, the Magic Tower might owe him a favor. And so he was sure the tower would pay when the time came, and as he walks, the boy mentions that Sienna had promised a qualified guide to assist him. Then a figure surprises our protagonist, asking if he was Dalen, the low-path hunter. We see that the guide is a girl, and with a smile on her face, she says hello, stating that she would guide the boy through the sewers for this job, and her name was Penny the Sewer Cleaner. Upon seeing the guide, our protagonist is completely incredulous, noting that the person looked like a child. Down in the sewers, lighting the place with a torch, Dalen asks if the sewers are the foundations of this great city, and the girl responds that they are and that she takes care of everything. Our protagonist notes that the girl seemed very attached to her job, and proudly, Penny confirms that she is. Dalen tells Penny that she might encounter demons or criminals and asks if she doesn't find it dangerous, to which the girl responds that she does, but it's worth it. Sweating, impressed with the young girl's personality, our protagonist notes that she is very positive and high-spirited. Dalen also asks how long the girl has been working there, and Penny replies that it has been about 3 years. As they walk, Dalen is impressed, noting that most people don't last more than a year in that job, so the girl is a veteran. For a moment, the girl stops and says they are close to the spot marked on the map. Hearing this, Dalen diverts his attention and, looking to his side, asks if the young mage disappeared there, and the girl confirms. Then it's possible to see a vast area in the sewers filled with sculptures and unknown corners. As our protagonist explores, he notes that the missing disciple is from the Magic Tower of El Gaia's, who are earth mages, so the underground sewers are advantageous for them in a fight. If he was a direct disciple of the ancient mage, the boy must be highly skilled, and for someone of his caliber to be kidnapped. Then the person responsible must be that guy, as the boy looks idly in a direction, thinking and imagining someone we don't know. This person was one of the biggest nuisances among the cultists, and when he fully develops, he will be called a one-man army. However, this person is still far from the completion of his powers, and for the sake of the future, Dalen should kill him now. As he walks through the sewers, looking at the water under his feet, the boy sees a shining object and notices something. Picking it up, he realizes it's a necklace, and Penny, seeing it, responds that it's a single-use defense spell necklace given to tower disciples, and Dalen already knew that. Observing more closely, he notes that the crystal is no longer lit, meaning the spells stored inside are exhausted. In other words, this was the mage's final destination as they observe the nearby structure. Looking at a certain object, the boy becomes somewhat reflective and hesitant, thinking about what to do next. Stating an entrance, he calls Penny, and when the girl responds, he asks if she is good at fighting. Dalen stares at a specific place, stands up, and draws his sword. Penny replies that she is good enough to defend herself, and Dalen responds that's sufficient. Our protagonist prepares for a bloody battle about to begin, wielding his shield and sword. In the same hand holding his shield, the boy also holds a torch and positions himself in front of Penny. He asks the girl to stay behind him for a moment, then some beings begin to emerge from the entrance our protagonist was watching. Several monsters resembling humanoid frogs walking on two legs appear with their grotesque appearance. With their tongues out, the monsters drool as if eyeing two prey, ready to devour them. Seeing this, Dalen calls the creatures frogmen, noting that even though they are lower-level monsters, they have high intelligence, making them difficult to combat. Looking back, Dalen sees Penny wielding a knife in a combat stance and nodding, realizes he has nothing to worry about. However, immediately some frogs charge at our protagonist, aiming to kill him once and for all and accomplish their goal. In reaction, right after seeing this, Dalen positions his sword for an attack. As soon as one of the monsters gets close to him and is about to attack, the boy swiftly cuts it in two before the monster can react. The other two creatures, which were behind the fallen beast, also move to attack, intending to use the moment when Dalen is distracted. However, with extreme ease and coldness in his eyes, the boy also cuts the two creatures in half, killing them instantly. Penny, however, is startled, making a face and staring at something in front of her, asking Dalen to look immediately. As Dalen pays attention ahead, he notices that one of the creatures is starting to come with a certain tool to attack. Not only that, but an army of frogmen is coming from the entrance, ready to kill Dalen and end his life. While wiping his face from the blood of one of the beasts, the boy starts to laugh, saying that maybe it's not an army, but a company there. Smiling wickedly, ready for battle, our protagonist adds that none of that matters. Preparing for battle again, this time he charges at the monsters, saying that nothing will matter after he kills all the beasts. After a while of a bloody battle, we see Penny holding her blood-stained knife, surprised by something. The girl can't even speak what she saw, and when we look around, a pile of frogmen corpses is scattered throughout the sewer. Dalen, his body completely stained with blood, asks if Penny is okay, and the girl replies that she is, thanks to our protagonist. As she approaches Dalen, the girl says she has been part of the cleaning crew for 3 years, so she can handle 2 frogmen. Suddenly, the boy asks the girl not to come closer, leaving her confused while he positions himself in front of her. Suddenly, a sword comes toward our protagonist, who barely manages to defend himself. He then throws his tool aside to draw his axe, intending to throw it. In a dark passage where nothing can be seen, the boy throws his axe, which spins towards something. It seems to hit one of the frogmen, making a monstrous noise suddenly. Penny, scared, asks how our protagonist knew there was a beast there, and he explains that monsters become more ferocious when hunting humans. Actually, the man was using his night vision ability, allowing him to see in the dark, and he notices that only 2 remain, with the last one fleeing. Penny asks what they should do, and Dalen explains that they will chase the monster since its lair is probably not far away. The woman, staring at our protagonist, feels somewhat embarrassed, saying he is extremely incredible. Dalen, noticing the girl had stopped walking, nudges her, asking what she's doing since they should go immediately, and the girl agrees. After a long walk, they reach a hidden room with a throne. Penny, still a bit scared by the situation, leans a little on Dalen and nudges the boy, pointing out that someone is sitting on the throne they are seeing. On the throne sits a mage holding a staff imposingly, and Dalen notes that it's the first time he's seen the boy in person. The pagan mage expelled from the magic tower, Derek, sitting on his throne, asks who our protagonist is and if he is the one who touched his experimental sample. Dalen thinks that the pagan mage was one of the bosses who gave him an unforgettable death, and the boy confirms to Derek that he was the one who killed the rat man because he was taking a stroll. The mage responds that the boy is lying because it's strange since normal people don't take deep strolls in the sewers as he was doing. The mage strikes his staff on the ground, making a loud noise while saying that our protagonist should not have pursued the frogs that fled to his lair. Then, from the surrounding waters, several frogmen begin to emerge. Penny, seeing this, starts trembling all over, holding her knife and looking ahead with a terrified expression. Looking around, she sees an army of various frogmen ready to tear apart and attack anyone. As she steps back, the girl says that if this is released into the city, it will cause a catastrophe, continuing with a terrified expression. However, Dalen touches her back, preventing her from moving further back, catching her attention and making her blush. Looking at Dalen, the man maintains a firm and confident expression as if wanting to reassure the girl. Seeing the protagonist, she understands that the boy can defeat as many frogmen as there are, so she doesn't need to despair. With a look of extreme psychopathy, Derek orders his frogmen to tear them both to pieces. Then, revealing they even had enormous teeth, the frogs charge ferociously to defeat Dalen and Penny. Dalen remains motionless before an army of frogs rushing towards him, ready to kill him. Holding a blood-stained sword, the boy asks Penny to stay behind him while he fights. The boy starts walking towards his opponents, reassuring Penny that he will finish this quickly. With a cold expression, Dalen states that if the conjurer dies, all the frogmen will die as well. Observing hundreds of these creatures coming at him with only a shield and a sword in his hands, he says there is only one answer. Swinging his sword with fluid and rapid movements in one direction and another, the only thing visible is the splatter of the creature's blood. One of the frogmen, about to attack Dalen, only sees his arm being cut off, groaning in pain before he can react. Still with a cold and frightening expression, our protagonist begins to shred several frogs while saying he would kill everyone in the way to get to the summoner. With just one step for momentum, the boy leaps forward, passing and eliminating several frogs without giving them a chance to react. After dashing forward, one of the frogs comes at him, opening its mouth and revealing immense sharp, pointed teeth, ready to devour our protagonist. However, quickly, with a look of disgust at the sight, the boy splits the frog's jaw in two, preventing it from attacking him. As he lands on the ground, several frogs surround the boy from all directions, not allowing him to escape. With just one hand, he prepares himself, clenching his fists, and quickly punches two of the frogs, eliminating them. He notices one of the frogs trying to attack him from behind and swiftly reacts, cutting it in two before the frog can see. The battle continues with several creatures attempting to attack our protagonist from all directions to compensate for their lack of strength and skill. But with all of Dalen's swordsmanship skills, he can easily kill most of them, but his sword breaks in the process. Due to the number of frogs attacking, even his shield falls apart, leaving the boy with bare hands. And then all the frogmen seize this opportunity to attack our protagonist, who intends to fight with his bare hands and kill all those beasts. He uses his Dahaman ability to fight with his hands, furiously stating that he would finish off all those damn frogs. Several beasts continue trying to hit our protagonist, who with only his fists crushes their skulls and stomachs. Throughout the fight, the boy maintains a cold expression, only clenching his fists and staining them with the blood of his victims, showing no mercy. With a single blow to the stomach of one of the frogmen, he can throw it against the other creatures, sending them flying. Derek the wizard, upon seeing this, is terrified, seeing that the boy was very powerful and seems psychopathic. Seeing his summons being torn apart by a man with bare hands, he wonders where such a monster had come from. Looking ahead, the pagan wizard does not notice Dalen advancing towards him with an axe in his hands, ready to finish him off. When he realizes it is too late and even trying to defend himself with his staff, he fails. A purple trail of energy can be seen moving from top to bottom, following Dalen's motion with the axe. After the dust settles, we see that our protagonist has landed a full blow to the pagan wizard's skull, who still utters his last words. Seeing that he had accomplished his goal, Dalen sighs in relief, realizing that everything was over. A notification appears with the wizard's death, indicating that he had discovered the body of a mercenary who had become a pagan wizard. Our protagonist remembers the moment he fought and was absorbed by Derek, who had dragon blood in his body and was used for experiments. Dalen adds, saying that thinking about it now, that scene was extremely horrific, cursing the corpse lying before him. Then the system asks if he wanted to absorb the body to acquire its skills and stats. Our protagonist then stretches out his hand, opening his fist, and uses corpse gathering to increase his stats. With green energy flowing through his body, all of his stats begin to increase, especially sense energy and mana. He also gains an ability called Dragon Blood Regeneration, which he had obtained in his former body, and he is already at 6% proficiency. Bulge on our protagonist, and the boy starts to feel something flowing through him, causing extreme pain. A golden aura starts to spread across Dalen's body, making him appear covered in a gold-like energy. Everyone in the room, including Penny and the frogmen, are incredulous, not understanding what is happening. For a moment, the boy remains still, feeling all this energy flowing through his body, making him extremely powerful. With confidence, the boy turns, drawing the attention of the frogmen and asking if they are ready for what is about to happen. After showing his new strength, all the frogs stare at our protagonist, trembling with fear. Fearing what would happen, they immediately flee before they can be killed. Seeing this, Dalen sighs a bit, closing his eyes and thinking about something. However, his thought is interrupted by Penny calling his name, and the boy opens his eyes to see the girl. The boy walks up to Penny, saying he told her to stay away, and she runs, asking if Dalen is okay. A bit frightened by everything that happened before her eyes, Penny asks if the boy is really human, and the boy asks what she means. Penny starts to say that even though the boy is human, not everyone is like Dalen, as he killed dozens of frogs with just his hands. Dalen asks what she thinks about something, and the girl doesn't understand the question, asking back why he suddenly asked that. Our protagonist responds that he only asked because he had nothing else to say, and the girl agrees but says she wanted to say something. Embarrassed, touching the tips of her fingers, she says that even though it's the first time they've met, he is different from all the other people she has known. Extremely shy, the girl says that being near him makes her feel he could do anything. She says she doesn't care if Dalen is human or not, as what matters is that the boy is himself, but Dalen interrupts, asking her to wait. With a slightly embarrassed expression, the boy says he wasn't talking about her thoughts. He wanted to know what she thought about where the pagan mage hid the hostages, leaving the girl completely red like a tomato. The girl gets irritated, saying that if he doesn't explain what he's asking, she won't understand. Elsewhere, in a church with an upside-down cross sculpture, we see some people talking. Four hooded figures are conversing, and one of them says the reason for urgently calling this apostles' meeting is because Derek has died. All the others are shocked, and one of them asks how a powerful pagan mage like him could have been killed. The mage conducting the meeting says that even though he was the last to be admitted, he wasn't the type of person who could be easily killed. One of the masked figures asks what happened to him and the army of 500 frogmen. Unexpectedly, leaving everyone in the room incredulous, the man responds that half the army was killed. He also explains that the rest fled in fear, and that's how Derek died. One of them asks if it was the guards who did this. Other masked figures also ask if it could have been someone linked to the Silent Company, but they also receive a no as an answer. The mage conducting the meeting says it was done by a single person, leaving one of the masked figures in shock. They continue talking, wondering why the bastard Derek kidnapped a direct apprentice of the Elder Mage, but an apostle enters the room. All the other masked figures there bow, greeting the great apostle responsible for everything. The man wears a mask like all the others with a smile, but unlike the rest, he walks with an elegant and imposing posture, showing his power. He walks to the center, sits on his throne, and says that the reason he called them there was to say not to fear, just a mercenary. The masked woman who was previously worried asks if it was really a mercenary who single-handedly killed an army of monsters. However, the chief apostle tells her to shut up immediately, making the woman scared. The great apostle explains that he has moved up the date of the grand plan because Derek's death doesn't mean their plans will change. One of the apostles, hearing that the grand plan will be put into action, realizes that this means something significant. Then the chief of all says to release the funds to buy ingredients for the secret drug and bring those who can wield weapons. Irritated, he adds that if things don't go well, they should pressure everyone with the power of the economy, since that is the reason they are increasing their power. The man says that nothing has changed and that the order of evil will begin with them, and the day when the 7 walls collapse is not far off. He orders everyone to prepare for the day the 7 walls will fall, while all the other apostles continue listening, bowed before their master. Elsewhere, after a long time, we see a magic tower in Algaias at a bronze branch. Looking at an extremely fancy clock, watching the hours pass, we see Dallin sitting in a comfortable armchair. The boy remembers Sienna saying that the person who had given the mission wanted to see him personally to give him extra compensation. Happy, Gallon continues looking around, saying there's nothing wrong with him receiving an additional reward, and that's why he's there. Bored and with no one calling him yet, the boy opens his status window, making it appear immediately. He begins to read about the skill he had acquired, Dragon Blood Regeneration. Regeneration, one of the many characteristics that come from dragon blood, was applied to humans but consumes a lot of stamina to use. In the sewer, he slept for a day as soon as he returned from the mission, and it seems he doesn't have full dragon blood in his body, only partially. The boy calculates that it would be impossible to use that skill continuously in a fight without exhausting himself completely. Suddenly, a man with red hair and a large beard enters the room, saying he had kept the guest waiting unintentionally. This person was Felver Valentino, the ancient mage of the magic tower of Algaias. He apologizes as it has been a while since he was last at the magic tower, so he had to catch up. Felver says he will ask for a cup of tea and asks if Dallin would like some, to which the boy replies yes. The ancient mage says something, but our protagonist immediately ignores it, starting to smell something he hadn't smelled in years. He smells coffee, and upon looking at the cup, he realizes it's really what he was hoping for, becoming completely happy to see it. The boy starts drinking it immediately, loving it, and then the noble elder says that based on the boy's appearance, he didn't expect him to like tea. While drinking, Felver, the elder, comments that if it's okay with the mercenary, he will send a bag of beans to the raven's nest, and the boy agrees, thanking him. The man apologizes for the inconvenience and introduces himself as an elder mage of the magic tower of Algaias, as well as a grandmaster of the arts. He's also Tommy's teacher, the person Dallin saved, so the boy recalls the moment he saved the boy, asking Felver if he is well. Felver thanks Dallin and mentions that Tommy is only well because of him. Our protagonist asks if he knew why the pagan mage went down there. The ancient mage explains that the villain coincidentally found his apprentice and followed his tracks. Looking at his reflection, Felver says that his apprentice didn't know that Derek's strategy was to reach him. Again, the great elder thanks him for defeating the army of frogmen alone and says he couldn't believe Dallin was just a silver-rank mercenary. Dallin replies that he shouldn't judge people just by an identification plate, and the mage agrees as everyone has their own story. The man throws a bag full of coins on the table, saying that is the reward, and it contains 100 silver coins equivalent to 1 gold coin. With a confident face, the mage adds that he will also reward him with something extra, picking something up. He places a beautifully crafted bag on the table, saying that is the present. The mage explains that inside it is a regeneration potion, and he thought that since our protagonist is a sword-wielding warrior, it would be useful. But the mage adds that he thinks Dallin won't need it anymore since he has dragon blood inside him, making our protagonist startled. Seeing Dallin's reaction, the mage quickly asks the boy to calm down as he's not there to threaten him, but to make an offer. Irritated and almost ready to attack, the boy tries to calm down, asking what the mage's offer is. Felver, with a completely different face and posture, offers our protagonist the chance to choose a different reward. At sunset, after a long conversation, we see Dallin leaving the place. He remembers Felver saying that the boy chose the right thing, so Dallin says that it's probably better than the potion. As he leaves, our protagonist remarks that he never imagined that the mage was so skilled that he could even recognize dragon blood in his body. Our protagonist also recalls the moment he finished fighting the mage and saw his axe shattered. Dallin feels somewhat sad as it was his last tool since his sword and shield were also destroyed. Penny notes that he can't do anything more with those and says Dallin needs to buy new ones, catching the girl's attention. A bit embarrassed, the girl says her uncle is a blacksmith and asks if Dallin wants to visit him because since the boy is special, she will ask her uncle to give him a good discount. In the present moment, the boy sighs, saying that if he's going to get a good discount, he should go there since he has no other option. Far away, we see the Forge Street in the Bronze territory, with many people walking around. As he walks and looks around, Alan says he thinks the girl gave him that location, but he isn't sure. However, he hears someone shouting for help, and when he looks in that direction, he is confronted with an unbelievable sight. He sees someone being thrown out of the forge Penny had told him about, hands tied behind their back. Inside the forge, a blonde man had thrown the person out after kicking him, saying the old man was screwing everything up. The blacksmith begs them to leave his niece Penny alone and curses the bastards. Seeing the situation, Dallin realizes what's happening and notices that the man is the girl's uncle. The man who was assaulting the blacksmith leaves the forge, saying that the man should have repaid the interest on time. The blonde thug says that if the blacksmith doesn't have money, he could use his niece to pay the debt, causing Penny to despair. Trying to get up, a bit hurt from the fall, the blacksmith tells the thug that if he continues saying those things, he will make him pay with his mouth. Our protagonist watches the fight from afar, observing the entire situation and realizing something. The blacksmith Penny mentioned is named Leveron Araquin, a well-known mithril refiner. Our protagonist explains that by the second half of the game, this blacksmith develops exponentially and creates the greatest weapons for humanity. He is a very important NPC blacksmith, necessary for the strategy in the second half of the game. Returning to the present moment, the blonde man draws a sharp knife and says the man could pay with one of his hands. However, someone firmly grasps his wrist, and the man gets irritated, asking who is doing that. Our protagonist snatches the sword from the thug's hand, saying that if an old man's hand costs a gold coin, how much would a young man's hand cost? The last thing we hear is the thug's scream echoing through the city, and some time passes. We see a mug of beer on a table, and the blacksmith thanks our protagonist for saving him and his niece. The man says he had heard about the boy because his niece had mentioned him and asked our protagonist, who is drinking, if he needs a new weapon. Unfortunately, the blacksmith explains that he cannot make a suitable weapon for the boy now because, as he saw earlier, he has a debt with the shop. Wiping the drink from the corner of his mouth, the boy asks what the man's debt has to do with making weapons. The blacksmith gets irritated, slamming his hands on the table, saying that people confiscated all of his tools as interest. And with this debt, a shop told him that if he worked for them for 5 years, the debt would be paid off. However, for a neighborhood blacksmith like him, the moment he closed the shop, it would end, and when the debt was paid off, the only future left for him would be to work in someone else's forge. Our protagonist assumes the man tried to maintain his position, and in the end, the thugs came to threaten him. The blacksmith ignores what our protagonist says, only mentioning that he hates those bastards from Telia, which catches the boy's attention. The blacksmith then, with his hand on his face, says that if Dallin came with that purpose, he could forget it. But unexpectedly, he is interrupted, and our protagonist asks how much the man owes, making him incredulous. Confident, Dallin says he will pay the debt for him while smiling happily. The boy begins to leave the place, but the blacksmith tries to stop him, saying the amount is too high for one person to pay alone. As he leaves, Dallin just waves goodbye, saying there is a way for everything in this world, and he doesn't need to worry, but in return, he wants the blacksmith to make some weapons. As he leaves, our protagonist picks up an axe from the forge to complete his mission. Looking back confidently, believing in his abilities, he tells the blacksmith to consider it a deposit. Finally, before leaving, the boy thanks him for the beer, and the only thing the dwarf does is watch the man leave. The blacksmith turns to his niece, asking who that man was, and the girl remains silent. Embarrassed, she says they first need to consider whether he was human or not, but in short, he was an incredible person. At night, elsewhere, we see several carriages with various supplies of food and drinks arriving. Someone speaks to Bulkma, who is carrying a log, asking the boy what he is trying to say. Our protagonist asks Bulkma if he could lend him some money, around a handful of gold coins. The man doesn't even know what to say, only observing the boy in front of him. After a while in a house, we see someone with a bag of coins in their hand, and Dallin says it was a commission. We recall the moment when Dallin was negotiating with Bulkma, explaining that a family member has a debt, and the noble asks what it's about. While eating some grapes in the noble's house, our protagonist explains that it's a business fund debt that kept accumulating until it became several dozen times what it was originally. Again, Dallin asks if the man could lend him the gold or not, and Bulkma is a bit hesitant, questioning whether he should. While smoking, Bulkma asks with whom this person created the debt. Dallin responds that it was with the Tilia shop, and upon hearing this, the dwarf makes an irritated face, clearly displeased. The noble then says he will lend the money, and Dallin, eating an apple, says it seems the man also has connections with Telia. Our protagonist asks what he should do in return, and the noble says he thinks quickly. While extinguishing his cigar, he says that the Telia shop is an organization with dirty funds, so he arranges to meet Dallin tomorrow at the same time. Dallin starts to explain about the Telia shop, an organization illegally created by the Apostles of Retrograde, a group of cultists. They control most of the commercial power in the Bronze Territory, a place that is essentially the life of the cultists. Dallin didn't plan to meet them so soon, but since they got involved, he will have to crush them. Our protagonist says he would confront them now. They are still a legal merchant association, meaning fighting them openly is very risky. First, he needed to get Leverin out of their clutches, and something comes to mind, making the boy a bit shocked. The boy, looking ahead, notices something he doesn't want to see as he looks at Leveron and Penny's forge. Irritated, the boy realizes it's in front of the blacksmith's shop, meaning the Telia bastards have started moving. Quickly, to protect his allies, the boy begins to run towards the forge without stopping. He sees a group of people armed with knives and clubs in front of the forge, ready to kill Penny and her uncle. One of the men tells the old man to follow them obediently, as they're not doing this, just need a few coins. With a hammer in his hand, he says he won't go, cursing all the henchmen and saying he will kill them. The man starts mocking the blacksmith, saying he's very afraid of a hammer, but the truth is he's just taunting him. With an army behind him, the leader of the group of thugs says that even if the old man can defend himself for a moment, he wouldn't be able to fight them all. The old man, no longer in his prime physical condition, starts trembling in fear, knowing he can't face them all. The thug leader then finally gives the order everyone was waiting for to attack the old man and Penny, calling her a bitch in the process. However, before he can react, an axe comes flying towards him. Immediately, the axe goes straight through, cutting off the thug leader's hand, causing him to lift his bleeding fist and scream in pain. Another thug was about to warn that they were under attack, but immediately Dallin appears behind him, grabbing him by the neck and breaking it. The thugs look at the boy attacking, and Dallin says he has finally made up his mind. With one foot on the lifeless body, he says he will consider each hand of everyone there as a silver coin. Since the price for the hands had been set, he proceeded to get a few more. His armed combat skill had been activated. The first face struck by his fist was crushed like a stomped soda can. The next in line received a punch to the stomach to reflect on his conduct. The third one, even armed with a sword, couldn't defend himself. There was nothing those fools could do. Even so, those who hadn't been beaten yet tried to react somehow. But they had no success. Since they were numerous, one of them said not to be afraid because their attacker was unarmed. He heard this with a smile on his face because he didn't need to be armed to handle them. As soon as they arrived at the place, they were shocked by the scene. The street now had a grim decoration with unconscious bodies lying on the ground. A bystander crawled away in fear, saying they had been attacked by a monster. His neck was stepped on, preventing him from crawling further. With his foot so close to the man's head, he finished the job. The two who had arrived wanted to know who had taken down the fools. Without answering the question, he tossed them a sack containing 26 coins. But the man couldn't believe this young man had done all this for him. In response, he said there was nothing to lose by being friends with a blacksmith as long as he made him some weapons as requested. Looking at the ground, he noticed something different about one of the bodies. So he took it in his hands because he knew the young man was pretending to be dead. He knew they hadn't done this just for a few coins and wanted to know what his superiors intended with all this. Even at a disadvantage, the young man said he wouldn't say anything to him. Since he gave the wrong answer, he got slapped back to reality. Without much patience, he told him this was his last chance, and he had better say what the fools said in the shop. He said to take all of them, so his inquisitor wanted to know who. Artisans, merchants, anyone related to the business. Take them or kill them. Now all that remained was to know who gave the order. Before he could answer, the boy's hand twisted in a bizarre way. He was transforming, but he said the order came from the owner of Tilia's shop. His face gave way to a lycanthropic smile. This made him more alert to what would happen next. Before the transformation was complete, he threw the boy to the ground. The longer time passed, the closer he was to fully transforming. Seeing an axe nearby on the ground, he grabbed it. Now that creature was just a body without a head. The blacksmith didn't know what it was, but he heard from the man that it was a half-monster. Apparently, they could now use semi-monster transformations in real life, a faster development than he had expected. As he was leaving, he told them to go inside, lock the doors, and stay there for a few days, but the blacksmith wanted to know where he was going. In his memories, he knew Tilia's shop hid repugnant things. He was headed to Gallius Emporium because he thought they were targeting one of his wealthy clients. Once he was done there, he would return to get his armor and weapons. In a room, a large chandelier lit the space. He thought it must be a coincidence that even Dallin had gone to speak at Telia's shop. They had always been suspicious, but he had learned that lately, they were buying a lot of goods. It seemed they were preparing for something big, more than just business. That's when he remembered the man asking what he'd like him to do in this situation. But he would leave the details for when he showed up again. Having coffee as the first activity of the morning was certainly wonderful. It didn't take long for him to be startled by someone suddenly entering through the window. It was Dallin, who had arrived in an extravagant manner. He didn't know why Dallin had arrived so suddenly, but he had already ordered the man to duck. Through the window, arrows began flying in, breaking the few remaining intact. Startled, he wanted to know what this meant. Dallin sighed in relief, saying that if he had been a little later, it would have been much worse. He would explain soon, but for now, the man had to hide under his bed. Reacting quickly, he threw the axe he was holding out the window. There was an archer hidden on one of the nearby rooftops. His face now became a place to hold an axe. As he left the room, he ordered the man not to leave until he returned. Dallin was quite happy because he would gain some experience now. The man heard what he said but understood absolutely nothing. He jumped out the window toward the nearest roof. Beside him was the small body of the archer who had tried to hide. In the axe holder was a white mask.
Я не могу, но достану звезду. Я не могу, но я знаю, куда иду. Я не смогу, это слова неуверенности. Нет, ты не слушай, иди вдоль своей преданности. Преданность, 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 преданность. Я слушаю свое сердце, как оно бьется. Ему не имется, но кроме как смотреть в оконце, краше посмотреть.
He looked around to get a sense of his surroundings. There were several of these men with masks on their faces. They began to appear in numbers on the rooftops. This was their main military force, white and gold masks in motion. This indicated they wouldn't just stand by and do nothing. Preparing for what was to come, he gripped the axe in one hand. There wasn't much time left before their grand plan would be put into action. A projectile flew in his direction. With skill, he used the axe to defend himself. Standing still wouldn't help, so he started to move. Before him were already a few of the fools who looked surprised. They tried to attack him in vain, but what they threw at him only hit the image he left behind. The first axe strike landed perfectly. It didn't take long for him to be close to the next one. This time, the axe brought about a separation of head and body. Now only 3 were left, and another projectile came his way. Once again, the axe was useful as a tool of defense. Someone said he must be the soldier who killed Derek. This man calmly approached him. They stood face to face, but on different rooftops. As soon as the masked man realized it was him, he expressed his desire to taste some of his blood. For the blood of valiant warriors is always a delight. This was a silver mask. He hadn't expected an executive member to be there. This was Stray Leader Hafen, a low-class assassin vampire who used poison and memorization. In the game, it was difficult even to react to his attacks. Still, he was excited to see how things would go now. There was no other option but to face him alone. Confident, he hoped to resolve everything in just a single strike. The vampire waited, smiling for him to approach. Dallin noticed something was wrong. He was now in the middle of a trap. He did his best to defend against the stakes. Now he felt he had been too reckless and should have been a little more patient. Because of his character's body that this guy had consumed, a notification appeared. He had discovered the killer who dismembered bodies under the night sky. Not to mention, the recent attack wasn't made by him alone. The vampire had help from the other fools Dallin hadn't dealt with yet. If that was the case, he needed to take care of those guys first. Attacking, the vampire said he was growing impatient because he already wanted Dallin's blood. The henchmen attacked in unison, just like the crossbowmen on the other side. Dallin found himself surrounded on all sides. With exceptional mastery, he disappeared and was already upon some of them. His axe found the first of many targets. There was no time to waste in this situation, and his attack continued. His strikes were precise and lethal. The long-range shooters were no longer breathing, leaving only the others. He then prepared to throw his axe toward them. Without time to react to the speed of the attack, one had already been hit. Preparing to finish them off, he used his combatability. As quickly as his axe advanced toward them, it had no trouble taking them down. The survivor of this strike called him a monster. Dallin was relieved that only one of them remained now. Without patience, he let his axe sing. However, he noticed an attack coming from behind. He had to defend immediately, using the axe to stop the projectiles. But what he didn't expect was for poison to come out of them. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he tried to move away from the smoke immediately. But he was already poisoned. The vampire said that a simple human couldn't resist a deadly poison. He hadn't used it earlier because of his companions, but now with only one of them alive, it was a reasonable loss. Even so, the vampire was relieved not to have faced him head-on, as he had taken down all the others without difficulty. Knowing this, he needed to make sure to get rid of him completely. Being a vampire, the poison didn't affect him, but he hoped the human wouldn't be able to resist. Amidst the smoke, he approached what he thought was the body of his victim. As he got closer, he realized it wasn't him. That body wore a golden mask. Dallin is already behind him, ready to let the blade of the axe sing. The vampire didn't expect this attack, much less that the human was still alive. Though he was caught by surprise, the first attack didn't hit him. What occupies his thoughts now is how the human resisted the poison. The only possible explanation is that he must not be human. That is certainly a terrifying monster. Before him, the man says his eyes are burning. It reminded him of tear gas when he was a soldier, but the vampire has no idea what that is. Not understanding what he's saying, he began to attack frantically. All he desires now is for this person to die quickly. Dallin sighed, unconcerned about the attack. He didn't care because their attack patterns were always the same, while the dragon's blood regenerated him. Dallin's foot sank into the roof. The vampire couldn't believe that the man was already before him. Worse than that, his throat was now in the palm of that monster's hand. With him immobilized, Dallin asked if the vampire would like to say his last words. He finally asked him how he survived the poison, which is lethal to humans. The vampire shouted loudly that it was impossible. Dallin told him he was talking too loud and crushed his throat. Luckily, it was a low-class vampire. If it had been higher, he would have turned into a bat or shadow and escaped. With that, he found a body that had perished trying to take down the vampire. The system wanted to know if he wanted to collect the body, so the body was collected by him. With that, he inherited the vampire's abilities, +3 in strength and jumping skill. Still in the house, the man was terrified because he never imagined he would be the target of an assassination. Even worse, in broad daylight, he remained in the room, holding a sword. Looking out the window, he tried to calm down because his head was still attached to his body. Contemplating the scenery, he wondered if it was all just a dream. Whether it was or not, it was wise to call his guards just in case. Preparing to open the door, he hoped Dallin was still alive. A loud noise erupted behind him. He turned, ready to defend himself. However, he felt ill and collapsed. Downstairs, Dallin said he needed to better control his strength now. Returning, he told the owner of the Emporium that he had completed his task, but found him unconscious. He thought he might have been poisoned, but again, the man didn't know why his mouth was foaming. In the room, someone entered, wondering what all the noise was about. The person who entered was Sienna, and to her, it made sense that the noise was caused by Dallin. Even so, he wanted to know what she was doing there. She brought the information he had asked for. The three of them sat in the room drinking tea while they talked. The man wanted to know if she was the informant from the Raven's Nest. She confirmed that she was. He couldn't believe she had an infiltrator in the Emporium, but if that weren't the case, she wouldn't have known where Dallin was. Looking at him, she spoke again, saying she had the information he requested. She discovered which organization those silver masks belonged to. Since she had obtained it from the sewer incident, he hadn't thought she'd have enough time, but the girl had proven more capable than he expected. The question was whether she had done it right, so he asked who they were. They were heretics serving an evil god and called themselves Apostles of Regression. Additionally, there was one more thing. That book was the ledger from Tilia's shop. Upon inspecting the book, he discovered a few more things. The owner of Tilia's shop was one of the executives of the Apostles of Regression. In recent days, they had been buying large quantities of medicines, metals, and weapons. All these goods were stored in a warehouse they had purchased a long time ago and had neglected. Dallin knew the place and hadn't expected them to have been there all this time. There were signs of the masked men there, as well as the people they had kidnapped, along with their henchmen. It seemed they intended to turn the hired thugs into semi-monsters and use the artisans to make weapons. This was the prelude to a war that would soon take place. He wanted to know if there were any updates on the Bronze Guards, since she was close to the commander of the Silent Company. She had spoken with him, and it seemed he would cooperate, but it would be difficult to attack the place without concrete evidence, and it was also outside his jurisdiction. However, for Dallin, that wasn't a problem. They just needed to create a justification for the guards to intervene. After the conversation ended, night fell over the city. A man complained about the cold, saying the winter was harsh. They could have sent the henchmen for that task, not the faithful followers of the cult. Even so, they were there standing guard at that building. His companion told him to stay quiet because if a golden mask heard that, he would be killed. The apostles have been working hard, and the grand plan will soon be put into action. Without warning, his companion fell to the ground. He had no idea what was going wrong, and Dallin was already behind him, much to his misfortune. Standing before the young man, Dallin wanted to know more about those white and gold masks. After all, he had killed them all. Hearing this, the young man was incredulous. Without waiting for his reaction, Dallin struck him. Thus, there would be no resistance from those two. Besides them, there were a total of 30 people there. Many were on the rooftops and in the alleys of that place, but most of them were already unconscious, so there was no one left to stop his attack now. He jumped from the roof and headed for the ground. His descent was perfect and silent. There were no addicts or beggars on the street at this hour of the night. It's possible they had been captured and monstrified. Since they accelerated the plan, they no longer feared staying in the shadows. In the morning, he received confirmation that the Bronze Guards would assist them in this matter. The plan was simple: invade the building, deal with the enemies, and start a fire. Once the fire began, the guards, who would coincidentally be nearby, would help extinguish it. With that, they would gain access to heretical evidence. In theory, it was a perfect plan. Only one thing bothered him at the moment. The building had 5 floors in total, and the owner of the tile shop must be inside. If an invasion occurred, he didn't know if that person would flee or stay in the place. Regardless of what happened, Dallin was prepared for what might come. After all, whenever possible, he had to step on them. He took a moment to catch his breath. The worst outcome of the plan would be losing the shop's intel. To avoid that, he would choose another method. With that, he began to move. Dallin ran with the speed of an Olympic sprinter who never took a doping test. His steps were powerful and firm. He prepared to jump using his newly acquired ability. Without apparent difficulty, he was almost at the top floor. In midair, he chose a spot to gain access to the building. His hand prepared a punch to make an entrance. The window shattered, and he was inside the building now. It had been some time since the last time. There were cells in the place, but no one was guarding them. This prison held captive the half-monsters. They tried to break free through the bars of their cells, but without success. Seeing all of this brought back unpleasant memories. A man said Dallin was making too much noise and that he and his apostles had witnessed the presence of God. However, it was the first time he doubted what his eyes were seeing. He wanted to know if Dallin had cast a spell. This was Achilles, the owner of the shop. Dallin said he didn't know much about spells, but as a rich man, Achilles could go to the doctor to get his eyes checked. The battle between the two began. At first, they both seemed evenly matched in skill level. Though Dallin was good, Achilles countered in equal measure. Their blades clashed and sparks flew from the impact. He knew Dallin was stronger than an ordinary man. It wasn't for nothing that the other apostles had perished in his hands. If someone told him Dallin was a giant, he would believe it. Dallin didn't seem pressured now and pushed him back with a single blow. Achilles caught his breath and remembered that the Grand Apostle had a reason to hasten his plan. Faced with this, he needed to get rid of the obstacle in front of him. So he began to chant a dark incantation. Dallin seemed to recognize the spell. A red aura formed, and it looked like he was awakening the half-monsters in the place. In the cells, the monsters were growing stronger, as if they were drinking some juice. It would take some time for the spell to take full effect. It was time for Dallin to act before things got worse. He threw his axe toward the masked man to distract him, but Achilles positioned his sword ready to defend himself. With one strike, he deflected the axe, sending it back into Dallin's hands. Without wasting time, Dallin leaped to attack him. Despite the strength of the blow, he was once again stopped by the sword. However, Achilles once again felt the disproportionate strength of this man. From below, a knee was on a collision course with the mask on his face. Achilles takes the first blow. He couldn't block it. The force was enough to shatter his mask. Despite that, he wasn't disoriented and managed to use his sword to strike back. They exchanged cold, intense glances during the duel. Dallin wielded his axe with mastery. Achilles, anxious, prepared to do whatever he could to stay alive. The two charged at each other once again. A succession of clashes followed as both were incredibly fast. Dallin, using his axe, managed to pressure him. Since he only used one hand, he was able to prepare the other for a punch. Achilles was struck squarely again. He writhed in agony, nearly coughing up his guts. Dallin simply watched the trajectory of his opponent's body. Fallen, Achilles coughed, trying to recover from the damage. That should have been more than enough time. Then he said, Anaxitarian, and bluish flames appeared behind him. The half-monsters in the area seemed more and more out of control. But as the flames rose, they appeared to fall under control. For a brief moment, calm reigned until the monsters began to go berserk again. They broke out of their cells. Dallin waited for them to get a little closer to him. The system notified him that he had discovered a mage who used a body's sword. It was a great opportunity since experience and bodies were coming his way. The monsters swarmed him. They did everything they could to keep him in the middle of them. But what emerged from the swarm were countless cuts. Achilles watched in disbelief, unable to comprehend that Dallin wasn't even tired. His armor, hidden beneath the tunic, had been destroyed by that man's fists. Looking at him, Achilles thought about what else could be done. Holding his sword, he knew there was only one way to take down such a monster. He needed to set an ambush while Dallin was distracted, fighting the monsters. He would use a skill he learned in the Order of Knights, where he put everything from his past into it. In his current state, there would only be one opportunity. He waited for the right moment. Finding an opening, he advanced through the monsters to strike Dallin. In a few moments, he would pierce that bastard, or so he hoped. Dallin had his back turned, apparently unaware of what was happening. The blade drew nearer, and Achilles believed he had succeeded. But just as he got close enough, the tip of his sword was sliced by the axe. That outcome wasn't something within the realm of possibility. The force of the blow also destroyed the handle of the axe. Dallin didn't know why the instant death strike had happened so suddenly, but Achilles didn't understand these words. With that, Achilles began to fall to the ground wounded. Dallin was frustrated because he could no longer use that axe. However, he began to cough as he had injured himself. Blood poured from his mouth like a spring. The dragon's regeneration kicked in, and Dallin wanted to see his status window. He was still at level 6 with good stats. His body was suffering from side effects, perhaps because he had increased his strength just enough to stay balanced. He needed to be cautious. There was still one more thing. The system said he had defeated the target. He had discovered a mage who used a body's sword. The system wanted to know if he would collect the body. While collecting the body, he imagined that he could have seen the end if he used both magic and swords, but the result had failed. Finally, the body collection was complete. He inherited the body's abilities, gaining 2 points of mana and 1 point of stamina. As a skill, he could now use the fire arrow. A notification appeared saying that the knowledge of the spell had now transferred to his mind. The sensation was different, and he wondered if this was the power of using mana. Saying Ignal Lot, fire appeared in the palm of his hand. It was certainly an interesting skill. With that ability in hand, it was time to play with fire. The building was already engulfed in flames outside. The guards ensured no one inside escaped. The half-monsters were being taken down mercilessly. Likewise, the masked ones had their escape routes blocked. In the midst of the fierce battle, the guards continued to press forward. They did what they could and managed to gain the advantage. One of them, enraged, threatened his enemies, but he was caught off guard by a golden mask that was there. His lowered guard allowed the enemy to knock him to the ground. If things continued this way, he would meet a bad end. Discreetly, he tried to reach for a weapon near his hand, but the masked man saw this and stomped on it. With little he could do, he imagined this was the end for him. Before his eyes, he witnessed what he thought would be his last moment, and he didn't want to die like this. At the last instant, something unexpected saved him. He still didn't know what had happened and wanted to understand what it was. From the top of the building stood the person who had saved him. It was Dallin, who, seeing the situation, did what he could to prevent further casualties. He still had many arrows left. He knew he needed to do something, as it wasn't over yet. Holding them as if they were spears, he prepared to throw them. His feet braced themselves. His concentration was intense because he couldn't afford to falter. With all the strength he had, he threw the 3 arrows at the same time. They soared through the sky, heading for the ground. Upon hitting their targets, they produced a large impact zone. The guards who witnessed this were frozen in place for a brief moment. It had been unbelievable to see. However, it wasn't over yet, and another order was given to finish off their enemies. From above, Dallin saw that the situation was now favorable for them, and for now, it would be enough. Holding his axe, he was prepared, because he... needed to join the battle happening on the ground. Focusing, he would use his jumping ability to descend all at once. With great agility, he headed toward the ground, aiming for an enemy nearby. Where the battle ended, bodies decorated the street, along with the injured survivors. The current effort was to rescue those who still had a chance at life, even if severely injured. Seeing how necessary potions were, he thought about it. He should have taken some from the old mage he had met. If he had them, he could save a few more people now. But the offer he accepted instead would allow him to save even more people in the future. Nearby, someone called his name. He was finally meeting the famous mercenary Dallin. It was Gawain, the leader of the Silent Guard squad. Thanks to Dallin's information, they had been able to pull this off, and he expressed his gratitude on behalf of the battalion. This leader was more talented than Dallin had expected. He should befriend him. Greeting him, Dallin mentioned that he had heard Gawain was the one who spoke to Elgaia about him. He had a good impression of him, considering what he had done for Sienna. And after today, he believed Gawain's talents had revealed themselves once again. He wished him luck in future endeavors. As soon as they finished speaking, Dallin felt a bit unwell. It was possible he had pushed himself too hard and should consider resting now. With that in mind, he said he would take his leave. Gawain mentioned that even though Dallin was strong, he should wear armor because you never know what might happen. In response, Dallin said he would get some very soon. By the dawn of the next day, he was walking through the city streets. He had spoken with the owner of the Emporium, but was supposed to be around here. Looking up, it seemed he had found it. The forge that had been prepared for the blacksmith's new beginning. Entering the building, he asked how the work was going. The woman greeted him happily, as she hadn't expected his visit. She then called for her uncle, informing him that Dallin had finally arrived. The timing of his arrival was perfect. The blacksmith had just finished what Dallin had requested. Looking at the chest, Dallin thanked the blacksmith, who hoped he would like what he received. Dallin prepared to open the chest. His eyes finally met the armor. Once dressed in it, he expressed how much he liked it. It had been a great decision to ask the blacksmith to make it. This made the blacksmith happy, and he said Dallin could also choose some weapons. Since his axe had just broken, Dallin was grateful. While he was there, someone entered the forge. Dallin bid farewell, apologizing for not being able to pay the full amount, but the blacksmith said he was only in this new forge because of him. That equipment was wonderful and would be of great help. Dallin hoped the blacksmith would continue making pieces like that. Hearing this, the blacksmith expressed his gratitude. Outside, someone said Dallin had come faster than expected and that the situation must be serious because of it. He apologized for interrupting the conversation, but indeed, the situation was dire. At that moment, he truly needed Dallin's help. The remaining forces of the heretics had gathered. The 8th territory was entirely under their control at this moment. Mounted on their horses, they left the city. Dallin wanted to know how the 8th territory had fallen. There had been evidence of that the tile shop, and they had discovered where their fortress was located. When they joined forces to enter, the heretics had already fled. In the 8th region, they had a hidden refuge. No one had expected the attack, and that's how they managed it. They almost did manage to establish a defense perimeter in the region. All the forces gathered in one place. Events different from those in the game were unfolding constantly. Something like this happening just 2 days after the attack on the shop. But this wasn't entirely bad. If things were changing, it meant they were moving further away from ruin. He definitely couldn't miss this opportunity. At the Bronze Guard's fortress, they were gathered. A hand slammed on the table, furious. The chief guard of the 7th Territory said that if they entered there, they would be annihilated, and he wanted to know who would take responsibility for it. But they couldn't just abandon those people. That's not what the chief was saying. What they had to do was establish a defense until reinforcements arrived. But if that was the plan, the chief of the 8th region said the people there would remain in constant danger. The situation was truly delicate. One of the guards said it was his mission to prevent something like this from happening. However, the chief smiled, appearing corrupt as if things were going according to plan. His suggestion was to block trade routes to prevent supplies from entering the city. Dallin said that's not what would happen. The chief turned his attention to the stranger. The chief of the 8th region did the same. If they did nothing, the heretics would grow in numbers and attack, which would be their negligence in the situation. Hearing this, the chief of the 7th region became furious. He didn't want to listen to a mere mercenary who didn't belong to the Order of the Bronze Knights, but the one accompanying him told the man to watch his words, because that mercenary had been instrumental in the capture of Tilia's shop. Knowing this, the old man was significantly surprised. The one before them was the one who defeated the owner of Tilia's shop. Realizing that rumors spread quickly, the situation now favored him. Continuing, Dallin said there was only one thing to do now, a surprise and preemptive attack, because that's what he had learned that day. The moment you step away from your fears, all you lose are material things. It was a hard lesson to learn. Gawain said that what the mercenary said was correct. Anyone who had participated in the attack knew they had half-monsters who were beggars and addicts that wandered the streets. In this way, it was only a matter of time before all the inhabitants of the 8th district met the same fate. With this information, they became pensive. There was nothing the corrupt old man could do now. They said they were there to help. But because the initial blow was so hard, they almost did manage to establish a defense perimeter. It would be good to have reinforcements, but even though they had requested them, nothing had arrived yet. If they were waiting for reinforcements from the Silver Territory, they would arrive soon. The man wanted to know how Dallin knew that. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. They didn't know if it was an earthquake or an attack. Outside, several people gathered. One of the guards wanted to know who they were. Apparently, they had arrived without any warning. The man at the front said it seemed there had been a misunderstanding, and that they were from the Silver Territory. They were from the magical tower of the Silver Territory. The timing was perfect, and it had been a long time since they had seen each other, calling Dallin an old man. Smiling, the mage said it was good to have lived so long because he had been called old by a mercenary. That's why he liked him. He was Felver Valentino, an ancient mage from the magical tower of El Gaia. In conversation, Felver said he wanted to offer Dallin another reward. If the city was ever in danger and Dallin called for help, he would do his best to assist. Now was time to fulfill that promise. The help of mages was always welcome, and Dallin thanked him for keeping his promise. In the dead of night, horses galloped swiftly. Their rider was in quite a hurry. He needed to ensure that everyone knew his message as soon as possible. A torch lit their path. They continued through the darkness. Looking at his companions, Dallin remembered what they had discussed earlier. After sharing the plan with them, he asked them to raise their hands. Not all of them agreed with this approach. Attacking first was risky, and he hoped to do it alongside people he could trust. The chief of the 8th Territory was to oversee the area. Only the elite would enter the mines. With that, all preparations had been completed. The Bronze Guards were being led by the leader of the Silent Division. The mages were also with them. It would be just them attacking the cult of regression. Their steps continued advancing through the darkness. Not far from them was the entrance to the mine. At the entrance, the mage said he could feel a sinister magic coming from within. Inside, a dreadful scream echoed down the corridor. It might be a half-monster. As they waited, a human figure came running towards them. His face was disfigured, and terrified, he begged them to save him. To their surprise, it was the chief of the 7th Territory. The disfigured man recognized the voice and knew it was the leader of the Silent Squad. He pleaded for help, claiming he had been betrayed. This revealed why he hadn't provided support. He had been in collusion with the cultists. Before they could converse further, something caught Dallin's attention. A man had killed him, saying it was disgusting for a traitor to speak of betrayal. Looking at those who had just arrived, the man was pleased. They had arrived at the right time because they needed more sacrifices. This was going to be complicated. They had to put an end to it as soon as possible. Gawain asked Dallin to leave it to him. He wanted to take care of this guy, and Dallin was confident enough to entrust him with the task. The masked man wanted to know who Gawain was, as he looked familiar. It didn't take long before he remembered. Then he threw the disfigured man's body aside. He recalled Gawain as the son of that beggar. The taste of his blood had been so potent that he still remembered it. Hearing these words, Gawain was consumed with rage. However, the mage urged him to calm down for a moment longer, because that wasn't the only enemy he would need to face. Gawain didn't understand this statement, but the mage continued walking. Chanting an incantation, a small flame appeared in his hand. As he finished conjuring it, the ground beneath them gave way as if an earthquake had struck. He made another gesture, and the stones gathered to bury the masked man. One of the soldiers watched, impressed by it all. There were many more cultists in that place. Dallin realized they had been hiding in the mist, and it was possible that a mage had created it. One of the legs of the platform they were on broke. To avoid falling with it, some began jumping from the height. One of them recognized the mage and wasn't pleased to have encountered him there. The lizard man's foot hit the ground, steadying himself to avoid falling. They had all been spotted, and none of them expected the mage to cause an earthquake so soon. Since the fight was about to begin, they would respond accordingly. Some of the bronze guards were anxious about the situation. Gawain prepared himself for what might come. Dallin observed the cultists' next movements attentively. Someone behind them placed their hand on the ground. The half-monsters were approaching. Their misshapen bodies reflected the suffering of those who had formed them. One of the soldiers thought these were creatures from hell. Even the mages struggled to maintain their composure. On the other hand, Dallin was quite pleased with what he saw. The cultists must have been having a great time if they had brought even the monsters. They would do anything for the grand plan, and he couldn't wait to turn them into sacrifices. The mage would handle the enemy mages, Gawain would take care of the lizard man and the monsters, and Dallin would have the pleasure of dealing with them. The battle had finally begun. Each engaged with their respective enemies. Dallin moved across the field, approaching the monster. As he got closer, the monstrous creature tried to strike him. The powerful blow hit the ground, but Dallin had already moved away. Leaping from above, he decided to attack from above. His axe descended toward the creature. A precise strike hit the disfigured body of the beast. Seeing the creature in pain brought him great joy. It was time to find out how much experience this creature would give him. The axe struck the monster's head, but nothing happened. Even though it had sunk halfway into its face, the creature remained alive. Dallin tried to pull his weapon out while the creature raged in agony. Its screams were so loud that he worried about the integrity of his eardrums. This was a monster created with mana from hell. If that was the case, it must have a mana core in its body, and indeed that was true. The axe finally dislodged from the creature's skull. With the axe free, the wound began to bleed profusely. This was an incredibly resilient creature, and Dallin knew he had to approach it cautiously. With that in mind, he attacked the monster again, this time with care to avoid his weapon getting stuck once more. This time, the creature reacted in time to block the attack, but its effort was futile and Dallin dodged it. He found leverage on one of its arms. His position now gave him the advantage as he was once again on top of the creature. Due to its misshapen body, the creature couldn't look up. Dallin's strike was devastating. There was no longer a head on that body, and its excessive size made it lack agility. He had to take advantage of this lack of mobility and aim his next attack at the chest. However, something made him stay alert. A mass of arms and hands advanced toward him. That would be a hindrance, and he did his best to defend against the attacks. Even so, the hands were too many, and they kept closing in on him. The attack pattern was as ugly as the creature's face. Despite being at a disadvantage, Dallin didn't want to remain in this situation. Using the strength of one of his arms, he managed to attack the monster at close range. Now he was using his combat ability for this. It was time to strike that hideous face once again with an elbow. His forearm connected with all the force he could muster. The monster's face sank further into its body. Dallin was now back on the ground, and the creature's body had sustained a lot of damage. But it wasn't time to stop yet, and once again he charged for an attack. What followed was a barrage of blows to the monster's flabby belly. After all those impacts, its mana core was exposed. Dallin had found what he was looking for. Using his fire-producing ability, he prepared to incinerate everything in his path. A fire arrow formed in his hands. He prepared to launch it toward the mana core. The arrow flew, leaving a circular trail as it passed and shattered the core, piercing it completely. With that strike, the remaining heads of the monster began to scream even louder. The noise was deafening, and Dallin's ears started to ache. Inside the mine, numerous half-monsters began to emerge. They poured out in a frenzy. The situation was growing more frustrating, and even at the end, Dallin was becoming more irritated. In the face of all this, they needed to find the Grand Apostle as soon as possible. A soldier called out for support for the mercenary, noting that the heretics weren't the only threat present. Dallin turned, intrigued by what he had just heard. The knights knew they had to eliminate all the monsters present. A mage prepared his incandescent bow. A barrage of magical arrows was fired by them. The monsters were pierced as if they were made of paper. With cover from the magical arrows, the soldiers advanced on the front lines. Dallin hadn't expected any less from the squad leader and the old mage's men. Leaping over the head of a monster, it was time to leave that area. But he needed that shield for a moment. He left the place, leaving the soldier without his shield and confused about what had happened. With the shield in hand, Dallin leaped along the walls of the mine's corridor, avoiding the monsters emerging from it. The lizard-like masked man didn't want the mercenary to get ahead of him. Seeing him distracted, Gawain seized the window of opportunity to strike. The lizard man's head was nearly severed, and the squad leader continued to press his opponent. The masked man taunted him, saying that no one would have imagined the son of a beggar would become someone like Gawain. To provoke him further, he said he would show Gawain how much he enjoyed the day he devoured his mother. He pulled out 2 large axes from his back. His mask had fallen to the ground. The crocodile man wanted to discover the taste of the beggar's son. He'd hoped that at least Gawain's taste would be similar to his mother's. Gawain didn't respond to the provocations and declared that before that happened, he would cut out the lizard man's mouth. Without hesitation, he leaped toward the crocodile man. Their battle was becoming increasingly fierce. The mage commented that he wouldn't assist the squad leader because Gawain wanted to handle it on his own and would merely observe for now. Besides, it seemed they were winning on all fronts. He then asked if the masked enemy before him didn't agree. The masked man replied that even if they lost, it would be impossible to stop the Grand Apostle. The grand plan would inevitably be fulfilled in a way no one expected. This left the mage intrigued about their methods, but the masked man said nothing more, only
На море, я сегодня смотрю на море, Сколько разных историй залило это море. No babe, no scroll me, тебе не надо быть so much скромной. Посмотри на это море, обрати взгляд на этом взоре. Ты облако похоже на сердце, что-то вроде. Если ты хотела, отложи что-то попозже. Сделай прямо сейчас, вообще нисколько позже. Ты такая красивая, I feeling sorry.
Smiling cynically, a way no one would imagine. That could mean many things. Dallin told the Grand Apostle to lift the state he was in, because he had surrendered his body to demons. But thanks to Dallin, they didn't have enough sacrifices. Even so, the Apostle didn't regret his pact as it had made his body complete. He began to thank the mercenary for being there, the warrior observed by the gods, the hero who wanted to prevent the end. Before the Apostle could finish his monologue, an axe was already buried in his face. The Apostle briefly smiled at what had happened. He knew he could no longer be killed by an attack like that. As the Grand Apostle, it would take much more than a single strike to defeat him. Dallin stopped speaking because he had noticed something. On the ground were several marks. He hadn't expected this. He had just found the body of the 6th Apostle and that of the Great Warrior. After playing this game many times, Dallin had committed himself to completing it, saying it was just for fun. At times, he even led the downfall. And once he had been an Apostle, his first deviation. The end of that story had been a long succession of deaths. Not even his subordinates had been spared. He had shown no mercy to any of them. In a single opportunity, Dallin had found 2 bodies. The Apostle remained focused, intent on attacking him. His goal was to make Dallin another sacrifice. The tentacles made it difficult for Dallin to find an opening to strike. The Apostle had formed a contract with a low-class demon, Araction. Even though it was a low-ranked demon, it had incredible regenerative abilities. The Apostle commented on how skilled Dallin was at dodging his attacks. However, he knew Dallin wouldn't be an easy opponent to defeat. Suddenly, the Apostle's image began to blur. Dallin realized he was disappearing. Before he could fully process his thoughts, a small cut appeared on his cheek. Now the Apostle was moving incredibly fast, and there were no openings in his movements. Dallin tried to defend himself, but his enemy was already at his side. Facing imminent danger, Dallin did his best to react in time. But, unfortunately, he was already trapped by one of the tentacles. This situation was not looking good for him. Struggling to free himself, Dallin attempted an attack, but the Apostle had disappeared once more. Feeling more exhausted than usual, Dallin suspected he might have been poisoned. However, the dragon's blood within him began to regenerate his body. Even so, it was taking longer than usual. Keeping up with the Apostle's speed in this state would be no easy task. Still, Dallin had no other choice but to take the risk. The Apostle leaped along the walls of the place with immense speed. His movements were meant to distract Dallin once again, as he positioned himself behind the mercenary. But this time, Dallin had anticipated it and was already prepared for the attack. The Apostle's tentacles reacted just as quickly. Face to face with the Apostle once more, Dallin was about to land another powerful blow. With his shield, he struck the ground, and though the Apostle had managed to dodge, some of his tentacles were now trapped. The Apostle was the one surprised this time. Unable to move, the mercenary attacked again. This time, the top of the Apostle's head was sliced off. The body collapsed from the force of the blow, and Dallin planned to keep attacking. But it didn't take long for him to be surprised again. More tentacles emerged from the Apostle's head, and the Apostle remarked that the warrior had many tricks. Muttering an incantation, the Apostle's face transformed, revealing large fangs. His appearance had completely changed. With the transformation, a spell was cast, and Dallin was engulfed in its power. The force of the magic hurled him through the air. The attack was strong enough for Dallin's dragon blood ability to kick in once again. It was much like the last time he had tried. The second body to fall to the Grand Apostle, the great warrior who had been captured. It wasn't that Dallin lacked strength in this situation. What he lacked was the endurance to keep up with the Apostle's regenerative abilities. It had been a short but extremely dangerous encounter. The power of a demon was truly incredible. The apostle's tentacles now took the form of spider legs. No matter how many tricks the mercenaries still had, they were all useless now. The apostle awaited Dalin's next move, knowing the mercenary was thinking of how to overcome his regeneration. The answer was clear. A single decisive blow was needed to end it. All Dalin required to defeat him was one attack, nothing more. With heightened senses, the apostle could hear the beating of a heart. The mercenary's presence in the room had changed dramatically. It was as if he had become a boulder deeply rooted in the earth. Faced with this shift, the apostle knew he had to eliminate this growing threat immediately. His tentacles rushed toward Dalin with the intent to kill. They were just inches away from striking his face fatally. But with a single punch, Dalin stopped them in their tracks and called out to the apostle, telling him to listen. With his compatibility activated, Dalin wanted to know if the apostle had ever been punched before. Planting his feet firmly on the ground, he used his jumping ability. With incredible speed and force, he closed in on the creature. The apostle covered himself with his tentacles, hoping to protect himself from the attack. But seeing this attempt, the mercenary smiled. His punch was powerful enough to pierce through the apostle's body. The apostle recognized Dalin's skill, acknowledging that it had forced him to retreat. But this, according to the apostle, was the end of Dalin's journey. However, Dalin responded with a laugh, saying it wasn't his time yet. Hearing this, the apostle paused, contemplating his next move. The mercenary had begun to invoke a spell while still gripping the creature's body. A great incandescent light filled the room. The apostle never had a name before. The best way to describe it was that his name had vanished, until the day he offered himself to the dark god in exchange for revenge. On that day, his existence was completely forgotten. Now he was nothing more than a servant of the evil deity. He had become the grand apostle of the dwarf who manipulated fate. He sought to destroy the last bastion of humanity, a center of power in the Diamond Palace. But none of that mattered anymore as he burned endlessly. Even in his deplorable state, he managed to impale the mercenary with one of his tentacles. But that wasn't enough to stop Dalin, as he, too, had the ability to regenerate. If the apostle couldn't gain distance, he wouldn't be able to heal from the flames. What he hadn't expected was being unable to retract his tentacles from the mercenary's body. Dalin wasn't about to stand idle. He was already preparing to punch the apostle once more, even with his body pierced. He definitely wasn't going to let him escape like that. Now the apostle's monstrous face was crushed. With things slipping out of control, the apostle hadn't expected to die in this place. Seizing the moment, Dalin told him they were far from the end. The apostle's tentacles lay severed on the ground. The apostle asked the mercenary if he knew that graphite and diamonds were made from the same material. The highest point can one day become the lowest and vice versa. The apostle had wanted to create a new order under divine will, but it seemed he couldn't defy reason. Perhaps this victory was nothing more than the destiny that had already been written. Listening to all of this, Dalin simply responded that the apostle was spouting nonsense. People had free will and decided the course of their own lives. Even Dalin, who had been pursued from the Diamond Palace. Hearing this, the apostle acknowledged it as a possibility. He tried to say more, but his life slipped away. It was the first time Dalin had heard the dying words of a boss monster. There were two bodies now, the great warrior and the apostle, and he needed both for the rewards. His proficiency increased by 1 point, as did his mana. As a new skill, he gained the ability to manipulate ice. Upon collecting the other body, he gained 4 additional strength points. That was a lot to absorb at once, and his body wasn't adapting well. Immediately, he began to writhe in pain and agony. If anything unexpected happened there, he might not survive. He needed to endure it. There was no other option if he wanted to return to the real world. Suddenly, Dalin found himself in another place. This was the starting point of the story. He wasn't sure if it was a dream or if he had returned after dying. But as he concentrated, he felt something. His physical body was far from this place. He was resisting the absorption of the strength points. It seemed like there was something he needed to do in this place. He opened the door of the cabin in front of him. Inside, he encountered an unusual scene. It was his own room, and someone sat in front of a computer playing a game. It was the game he used to play endlessly, and the character on the screen was the one he used to create. As the person moved the mouse, they were deciding what the next mission would be. Dalin stared, stunned at the scene in the room. It couldn't just be a game. The times he played without the will to win. The NPCs he had killed. The times he gave up on saving people. He had no idea how many worlds he might have destroyed by playing. A hand gripped his ankle, pleading to be saved. Shadows emerged from the ground, all begging for the same thing. Indeed, the person in front of him was himself. But it represented his past and his original sin, not who he was now. Realizing the magnitude of the situation, Dalin became furious. Though he had stopped the destruction, it didn't mean he was free of his sins. But this was the only way he could try to atone. Reaching this conclusion, the environment around him shifted. This time, he promised that in this world, he would not give up, no matter what. A system notification appeared. He had gained a small territory. Outside, many were injured, and the focus now was on helping them. The mage used one of his many spells. Ethereal hands appeared, glowing with a warm yellow light. They began treating the wounded, speeding up the healing process. Once the treatment for that soldier was complete, the mage told him to rest for a while. Looking to the side, the mage noticed someone approaching. The calm footsteps continued to march. Dallin had returned from inside the mine, alive and intact. The mage had been deeply worried, and it was a huge relief to see him unharmed. Looking closer, he noticed something different about Dallin. He immediately asked if Dallin had obtained the small territory. As expected from the elder mage, he noticed it right away. When Dallin woke up, it felt as though he had unlocked a new sense. All of his attributes, except for strength, had increased by 1 point. His proficiency and his abilities had also improved. He suspected what might have caused all this progress. It had something to do with the message he received before he woke up about the small territory. The elder mage probably knew something about it. Dallin had many questions, but this wasn't the ideal place, and the mage was called away to help more injured people. However, the mage mentioned that if Dallin had any questions, he could visit the magical tower whenever he wished. Dallin agreed, knowing he was always welcome. Now his attention turned to the leader of the silent company. Gawain was bent over the corpse of his enemy. Having fulfilled his vengeance, he must feel relieved now. Beside him, Dallin noticed a young person. It was Tommy, still under evaluation it seemed. After the sewer incident, it was necessary to acknowledge his tenacity. Even so, Dallin was confident the elder mage would guide Tommy well. Before him on the ground was a mask. Finally, they had put an end to one of the causes of the destruction. Despite this, it was only the beginning. Powerful demons still roamed the world, as well as witches who manipulated the elements, dryads who went not like humans, bloodthirsty vampires hiding in every corner, and dragons that existed on a completely different level from anything Dallin had encountered so far. They would have to wait for his development, because he would defeat them one by one. With a letter in hand, Dallin continued walking as he read it. Because of his deeds, many commissions were seeking him out now. Even important figures were frequenting the tavern hoping to catch a glimpse of him. It seemed like there were plenty of nuisances for him to deal with now. Finally, he arrived at the tavern, which was much more crowded than before. He hadn't expected to become this famous. Sitting at the bar, he ordered a drink. A stranger approached, asking if he was the famous hero of the place. The man kept talking, but Dallin had no idea who he was. The man complained that none of his requests had been answered and wanted to know if Dallin's fame had made him forget the city and its people. Leaning in closer, the man told the mercenary to stop playing games as he had spent a lot of money trying to find him. Dallin brushed the man's hand off his shoulder, telling him to just drink his alcohol. It wasn't a casual shove. The man's hand felt strange. As Dallin drank, the stranger continued to complain that something was wrong with his arm. Enraged, the man wanted revenge for what had happened and declared he would make Dallin unable to even crawl. The man lunged forward with his saber, aiming to stab the hero. A few arrows struck his arm, and more arrows hit his legs. A woman's voice warned him that he shouldn't be swinging his weapon around in the shop. Bad customers weren't welcome and could leave immediately. She clearly wasn't joking about that. As the man stumbled out, she said Dallin was late and they needed to leave soon. That woman was definitely frightening when she wanted to be. Dallin mentioned that she was busy scaring off troublesome customers, but she said that was nothing. It was thanks to Dallin that the tavern's profits had increased significantly. It was time to talk about mission requests as a whole stack had arrived in the last week. Looking at the pile, Dallin asked if she could narrow them down to the most likely ones. The woman asked if he had any specific preferences. Dallin requested missions that offered stamina-boosting potions or spells for enhanced vision or rituals that could grant those abilities. Given his immense strength, it posed a problem. His stamina was the only thing holding him back, and he didn't want to experience that pain again. The woman mentioned a mission that could be suitable, but she didn't recommend it. The mission was requested by an apprentice knight of the Order of the Sacred Knights. The request was to slay a demon hiding in a labyrinth and retrieve the sacred sword it had stolen. Intrigued by the description, Dallin said he would take the mission. The woman couldn't believe he actually wanted to do it. Thanks to this opportunity, he'd be able to explore the labyrinth, so he asked her to contact them. Outside, the scene wasn't what he had expected. A woman in armor was dealing with some men, challenging one of them to a duel. To ensure everything followed the rules, she asked if there was a notary among them. The situation was so bizarre that Dallin couldn't tell if it was real or not. Several carriages were entering the city. Dallin introduced himself as a gold-ranked mercenary. The medallion had been given to him by Gawain as a reward for helping them. As a gold-ranked mercenary, he only needed to pay 8 coins. He paid the fee, happy that his status had improved. With the gates open, he entered. Finally, he had arrived at his destination, the land of adventures, the Silver Territory. Looking at the city, he sensed there was something more to it. This was where the entrance to the labyrinth was, where he could obtain a stone of desire. An elderly man approached him and called out. He asked if Dallin had come to the city because of the labyrinth. Dallin confirmed, and the old man reminisced about his own adventures. It was a good city to live in, the old man said, mentioning that his whole family had stayed there. But Dallin wasn't in the mood for conversation. The old man's last words were to wish good luck to the warrior who had caught the attention of the gods, and Dallin turned around. But there was no one there anymore. That was an NPC Dallin had never encountered before. Perhaps it was the one with many faces. Dallin was certain it was, and he was sure he'd see him again. His contractor was Lucia Castichild, a woman with strong convictions and beliefs. Even though she was violent toward demons, she was merciful and kind to people. It was this woman who was now in a heated argument before him. She ordered the man to take back what he said, or she'd crush his skull. All the man had said was that Barrett lost the sword in the labyrinth, which prevented them from completing the mission. In defense of Barrett, Lucia said he was a knight known for his swordsmanship and, unlike them, fought until the end. But the man retorted that the sword does not recognize bastards. Lucia could no longer contain her rage. She drove her sword into the ground and challenged the man to a duel, only needing a notary to officiate it. The mercenary she was facing was enraged and said she must have a death wish. Those watching the scene said it would be entertaining, and some even started placing bets. People were divided between supporting the mercenary and the sacred knight. Dallin brought his hands to his head, thinking the crowd had gone mad. Lucia didn't want spectators, she wanted a notary. Approaching from behind, the mercenary said there was no need for a notary because all that would happen was that she would cease to live. The surprise attack was about to hit her directly. Before the blow could land, someone intervened, saying they should end the fight then and there. Dallin
С тобою альфа и омега. С тобой бы уехал я на край света. Неважно, я в ресурсе или не был, но детка никогда тебя не забыл. Она подумала, что кретин. Зайди в мои чувства, магазин, зин. И я опять курю никотин, чтобы понять, что я не один. Нет, не подумай, я не кретин. Зайди в мои чувства, магазин. Для своей души найди анальгин. Подарил тебе не один раз. Подарил тебе не один, два.
Said that Lucia was his ally. They had both said everything they needed to each other, so there was no reason to continue fighting. But the mercenary wasn't satisfied, saying he would start with Dallin if he didn't move. Smashing his club, Dallin pointed out that the mercenary no longer had a weapon to use. With this show of strength, the situation finally calmed down a bit. Lucia asked who Dallin was, and he explained that he was the mercenary she had hired. Later, in a quieter setting, she thanked him for his help. She formally introduced herself as Lucia, an apprentice knight in the Order of the Sacred Knights. The mission request had been lacking in details, and Dallin wanted to know more. Lucia explained that the Sacred Knights were guarding another part of the labyrinth, a fissure located in the southwestern region of the continent. The terrain was incredibly rough, with no barriers, meaning monsters could emerge from it at any time. Before heading there, they needed to stop at Safer Palshan to prepare. Her companion Barrett had just become an officer and had gone to Palshan, but he never returned and was declared dead, and the news soon reached the Sacred Knights. One of the 12 sacred swords had been stolen, and there was a culprit. That person was Barrett, her friend. If he had been chosen by the sacred sword, he could have communicated this, but she didn't know why he hadn't. Now that Dallin understood why he was hired, he wanted to know which of the sacred knights would accompany him. Lucia explained that there were no available forces in this area. With the monsters active, there weren't enough knights, so it would just be the two of them in the labyrinth. Seeing this opportunity up close, Dallin realized he had a chance to help someone who would become a heroine in the future. He told her he would wait for her at the entrance of the labyrinth the next day at 12 o'clock. Hearing this, Lucia could hardly believe it. Dallin slammed his empty glass on the table, because now they were going to recover the lost sword. At the magical tower, Dallin leaned over the parapet near the garden. Approaching, the elder mage apologized for keeping him waiting so long. The lecture had taken more time than expected. Another person accompanied him, introducing himself belatedly. It was Tommy, one of the elder mage's best students. Tommy had clearly learned something as he now appeared much more mature. He was likely there to discuss the matter they hadn't had time to address earlier, and indeed, that was the case. A great light emanated from Dallin's body. What Dallin wanted to know was about these territories. A large aura formed around him. The elder mage was impressed because Dallin always exceeded his expectations. It proved that Dallin had the potential for even greater power. Only those who made peace with their past could achieve this. Dallin listened to these words attentively. Overcoming his past, it was almost exactly what had happened to him. The elder mage asked if Dallin knew how to handle his domain, to which Dallin replied that he didn't. The mage explained that a domain was essentially the construction of a fantasy world. Unlike reality, which had many restrictions, in the world of fantasy, anything was possible. Having a domain meant Dallin had access to this world as well. Dallin wanted to know how to access this place he had taken hold of. The elder mage suggested that it would be better for Dallin to see for himself, and he sent Tommy to rest. The boy agreed but left disappointed. Bowing, Tommy also bid farewell to Dallin. For now, it was too much for the boy to witness a domain. The flow of mana could cause confusion. With that, it was time for them to begin. After casting a spell, a bright light enveloped the elder mage's body. This was how his domain was being summoned into reality, bringing impossible possibilities with it. This was the essence of using a domain. Dallin could sense the place. The mana flowing from the elder mage was distorting the world around him. Dallin remembered that when fighting the apostle, the flow of mana around him had changed. Now he finally understood what had happened. The mage asked if, after seeing the demonstration, Dallin could use his own domain now. Dallin didn't think he could just yet, and the mage said it would take time. Powerful mages have limitations as great as their powers. Dallin wanted to know what the Elder Mage's domain did, and he explained that it had many abilities, but primarily it allowed him to see the memories of the land. Everyone who passed through it left their mark in some way. He could not only see the past, but also glimpse parts of the future. Dallin pondered the fact that the land recorded the passage of time for all. With that, he had one more question he wanted to ask the mage. Since coming to this world, one question had lingered in his mind: who is he? Outside the labyrinth, the time was almost upon them. On the first floor, Dallin was already with his contractor. He asked Lucia if she was nervous, and she admitted that she was a little. This was the past of someone who would one day be called the Demon Slayer. Even Dallin was curious about how someone so young would one day become a sacred knight. Near them, Dallin overheard a conversation about the source of some information. It was the mercenary he had encountered before. The mercenary was claiming that he had seen it with his own eyes and had no reason to lie. The sacred knight had mortally wounded the demon. A low-ranked demon wounded was good bait for adventurers. Those who slay monsters in labyrinths are greatly rewarded. But this way of thinking was flawed because the demon wielding the sacred sword would only grow stronger. So the demon would hide the sword and accumulate power over the years. With the demon vulnerable, they could now do whatever they wanted with it. As the doors began to open, Dallin told Lucia to prepare, but she had expected a portal to appear. Instead, a large light formed beneath them on the ground. The labyrinth was below them, and the doors opened in the floor. Lucia hadn't anticipated that small detail. They fell through the portal, with Lucia terrified by the drop. They descended into a valley-like formation. Dallin managed to land without injury, but Lucia hit the ground face first. Now they were finally inside the labyrinth. Lucia asked where the others were, but Dallin explained that the mana waves were unstable here. Because of this, pinpointing precise locations was complicated, and they had fallen randomly into the first floor. Lucia was curious how Dallin knew so much about the labyrinth, given it was his first time there. Dallin responded by calling himself a veteran novice. Looking at the constellations, he determined they were northeast of the return location, the opposite direction from where the sword had been lost, meaning they would need to cross the forest in the middle. The cave where the demon was hiding was being protected by magical barriers, and over time, it would become a magic-infused cave. Knowing this, Dallin said they needed to move faster. A noise in the night alerted Dallin, making him more vigilant. To him, this was a good sign. Being with a sacred knight had brought them luck, though Lucia didn't understand what he meant. Still, she felt lost in the chaos unfolding around them. Nearby, several ghouls and giant wolves began closing in on them. Lucia prepared to fight and said this didn't feel like good luck. Jumping into action, Dallin told her she would soon realize where their luck lay. Descending from the air, he was ready to deal with the first of their enemies. A flash of light erupted in the forest as Dallin attacked. A figure emerged from the shadows. Dallin now had a mount which would help him reach his destination quickly. The night continued, and the monster camp remained quiet. One of the monsters stood watch, keeping an eye on something in the distance. Not far away, someone let out a scream. Lucia was terrified by the experience. She begged Dallin to stop, saying she was too afraid and feared they were heading straight for the nest of monsters. The monster on watch howled, warning its companions. They were getting close and were about to collide with the barricade. Dallin dodged, but Lucia crashed into the wall. Dallin rushed her aside, asking if she was alright. Lucia said she was fine, but was surprised by how he had used the animal's instincts to return home. Thanks to that, they had covered a great distance in a short amount of time. Now all they had to do was get out of there. But Dallin had other plans. They were in a monster nest, so they needed to eliminate all of them. He instructed Lucia to follow him carefully as he prepared for battle. Using his jumping ability, he was already in the thick of the fight. Calling the monsters to attack him, Dallin fought with skill. Lucia watched, knowing she couldn't stop this behavior. Gripping her sword, she prayed to the god of battle. Her eyes gleamed and her focus intensified. In the blink of an eye, she darted through the monsters, slicing them with her blade. Dallin hadn't expected much from her, given that she was still just an apprentice. But she was undeniably talented and had the potential to become the heroine she was destined to be. Watching her abilities now, Dallin realized he had no reason to worry. He continued to move through the battlefield. The two of them didn't stop fighting the monsters around them. After a long battle, they both positioned themselves, ready. They were surrounded, but now they stood back to back. Lucia complained that the monsters seemed endless. Dallin asked if she knew how to make them give up. She responded that they learned it during training, so she knew what to do. The monsters growled, and Lucia said they were nearing the point of annihilation. But before she could say more, a loud growl echoed from a nearby building. A spear struck the ground and a massive creature held it. This was their leader, and if his necklace was cut, the monsters would retreat. Upon the leader's appearance, the remaining monsters bowed before him. It seemed the commander didn't like watching his subordinates die endlessly. The system notified Dallin that he had discovered two more bodies, the first traveler to the labyrinth and the experienced fighter. Dallin told Lucia she could rest while he dealt with the monster, but Lucia insisted she could still be useful. Just as she finished speaking, pain surged through her body. She had overexerted herself. She realized she shouldn't have spent so much energy dealing with the scouting group. Despite everything, was curious to see that Dallin didn't seem tired at all. Lucia was curious about what kind of commander this wolf-like creature was who didn't fight and yet seemed eager to deal with him. The beasts charged forward and soon their weapons clashed with force. Dallin recognized this monster. It was Bargoaf, soon to become a subordinate of the eagle god. Bargoaf asked the mercenary who he was. He wanted to know who this person was that had invaded his territory, massacred his people, and what he wanted. Dallin was surprised, not expecting the beast to speak. Dallin responded that he didn't need a reason to take down those who devour humans, and from what the wolf was saying, he must have made a pact with the evil god. To do so, 10 human hearts were required, and the monster remarked that Dallin wasn't an ordinary human. Dallin, irritated with his chatter, said he didn't have time for this and wanted to finish things quickly. The monster accused him of arrogance, declaring he would torture him thoroughly before devouring him. Dallin sarcastically hoped that the beast would at least do his best. The two were about to collide again. A massive wave of debris was kicked up from the force of their clash. Lucia anxiously waited for the dust to settle to see what happened. Dallin had been captured, held in the wolf's grip. The monster mocked Dallin's courage, but Dallin brushed off the comment. He had expected Bargoaf to be stupid, but not to leave his hands free. Using his newly acquired ice magic, Dallin froze the wolf's arm. In his wild past, Dallin often relied on magic, and now the wolf's arm was completely encased in ice. Bargoaf snarled, warning Dallin that things wouldn't end the way he expected. But Dallin was already activating his combat ability, ready to break the frozen limb. With a single powerful strike, the wolf was now missing an arm. In disbelief at what had just happened, Bargoaf flew into a rage. Dallin took the opportunity to gain some distance, preparing his next move as he approached the monster once more. The wolf, shocked and confused by what was happening, staggered from the blow. Oppressed by the human, Bargoaf growled that he hadn't intended to use his full power. With 10 hearts, he had gained intellect. With 20, the strength to crush stones. With 30 more hearts, he had gained regeneration abilities. Now furious, he wanted to tear Dallin apart. Dallin calmly encouraged him to try his best. Their battle continued, but despite the wolf's strength, there wasn't much he could do. Dallin wasn't sure if his actions were affecting events in the game because Bargoaf wasn't supposed to have made the contract yet. Another cloud of dust rose from their clash, and Lucia anxiously watched, hoping everything was alright. She felt uneasy, not wanting to be just an observer. Behind her, some wolves began growling. This lifted her spirits a little. Now she could do her part. Covered in magic, she provoked the monsters into attacking her. The exhausted wolf leader growled, asking Dallin what he thought of all this. His wounds had completely healed, and there was nothing Dallin could do to stop him. Dallin acknowledged that regeneration was a useful ability, but forming fire in his hands, he was curious about something. He wanted to see what would happen if the wolf were completely incinerated. The sight of flames frightened Bargoaf. Dallin's next punch was strong enough to pierce his chest. Now with his sword in hand, Dallin was prepared to continue his attack. He had no intention of stopping his attempt to burn the creature alive, but things didn't go as planned. The sword didn't cut as Dallin had hoped, and the wolf offered him a deal. Bargoaf claimed he had a chest in his cabin filled with the relics of humans he had killed. If Dallin spared his life, he would give it all to him. Dallin thanked him for the information, and the wolf believed he would be spared. Slowly, Dallin dropped his sword, but just as quickly, Dallin decapitated the wolf, ignoring the offer. Even though Bargoaf had gained power from the eagle god, the things he spewed were revolting. With the final battle over, Dallin turned to Lucia. He had thought she would be exhausted, but she had managed to deal with the remaining monsters. He praised the sacred knight for her efforts, and she returned the compliment to the mercenary. Now it was time to continue, but Lucia seemed startled by Dallin's blood-soaked appearance. Seeing her reaction, Dallin asked what was wrong. For a brief moment, she had thought he was a monster. Elsewhere, a demon sensed that another pawn had lost its life. After the cultist, the wolf had been next. The demon couldn't believe they had both lost to humans. The dwarf who sways the future was watching. Anaxagus, the demon, desired nothing less than to overthrow the god from his throne and usurp it. In the hall where he stood, surrounded by bodies, more people arrived. A hunter among them declared that he would cut off the demon's head and keep it as a trophy. But Anaxagus, bored by yet another group of dungeon explorers, gave an order for his corrupted knight to rise. At first, they believed it was just a puppet. But with a gaping hole in his chest, the knight revealed himself to be none other than Lucia's deceased friend. The hunter, eager to end this quickly, stated his plan to take care of the puppet before dealing with its master. Before he could finish his sentence, a sword was already on its way to his throat. All of them were cut down without a chance to defend themselves. The demon smiled at the scene. This was the work of a masterpiece. Before Dallin stood two bodies he had discovered. As he began to collect them, his proficiency increased by 1 point, as did his stamina. He gained another point in proficiency and a new skill. Lapentella's pulverizing sword, far better than he had expected. Now, Dallin sat before a campfire, reflecting. With all he had recently gained, he opened his status window to get a better sense of where he stood. In addition to his new skill, his proficiency and stamina were steadily approaching the level of his strength. Now only 10 points separated his stamina from his total strength. With this, the chances of experiencing another episode like before were greatly reduced. Beyond that, the best acquisition so far had been the pulverizing sword skill. It had come from the last body he collected. Thinking about the combination of his dragon blood abilities with the pulverizing sword, he couldn't wait to use both in combat. Skill and experience. These seemed obvious. He remembered his meeting with the Elder Mage, who once asked him who he was. Using his abilities, the Elder had revealed something unexpected, that Dalen's total life expectancy was only 2 years and 1 month. Out of all the things he could have heard, this was the last thing he expected. Since he arrived in this world, 2 years had passed. This meant his body had been created on the same day he arrived. The elements of the game were deeply connected to this reality, and Dalen just wanted to understand why he reincarnated here. Perhaps he was meant to relive his gaming experiences. No matter how much he speculated, nothing made sense. So he decided to focus on his immediate goal, the item that could fulfill any wish, the Stone of Desire. He needed to find it at all costs and use it to return to Earth. As he pondered, someone approached and called his name. Lucia had noticed that he seemed troubled and wanted to know what was on his mind. Dalen broke.
Попробуй взять, попробуй отнять. Покажи свое противостояние. Что обертка не более, знаешь, плевать. Повернуть время вспять, чтобы выйти опять и залатать свои пробелы. Знаешь, однако не просто лезть в свои мысли, лететь своей костью, репетировать слово свобода внутри, понимаешь, а не отморозка, Наверное, было сейчас броско, я бы сделал тут отступ, но после него следует контратака. Молодой, ничего не понимаю, город колот меня изнутри.
Brushed it off, saying it was nothing, and asked why she was awake. It wasn't her turn for watch yet. Lucia admitted that she couldn't sleep and offered to take over his watch now. But Dalen preferred to stay by the fire a bit longer, watching the flames burn. Considering everything that had happened recently, it was no surprise she couldn't sleep easily. The thought of her comrade no longer being alive must be too shocking for her. Continuing the conversation, Dalen asked Lucia what kind of person Barrett had been. After all, if the sacred sword had recognized him, he must have been extraordinary. Lucia confirmed that he was, but not just in that way. The Barrett she had known had been the most loyal sacred knight she had ever met. His personality and dignity were so exceptional that he was respected by both newcomers and veterans alike. Lucia herself had admired him greatly. Barrett was kind to everyone, someone truly deserving of admiration. And that's why she couldn't understand the accusations made against him. To her, Barrett hadn't stolen the sword, and she didn't comprehend how it had ended up in a demon's possession. Thinking about this, Dalen admitted that the story didn't make much sense. If Barrett had been recognized by the sword, he wasn't a mediocre knight. And if he had companions with him, a low-level demon shouldn't have been a problem. According to the other mercenaries' account, Barrett had even wounded the demon in the belly. If all this were true, the demon should have been an easy opponent. But before Dalen could dwell further, Lucia interrupted, saying that if Barrett had fallen fighting evil, she was proud to have been a knight alongside him. Dalen responded that if Barrett had friends who thought so highly of him, he was surely grateful to her, wherever he was. Though Dalen's words were kind, it made Lucia emotional. As Lucia was thanking Dalen for his kind words, a swift arrow came dangerously close to striking her head. Dalen reacted in time, preventing it from being a fatal hit. Not yet fully aware of what was happening, Dalen was already on high alert, prepared to respond to any threat. He shouted that only a fool would fire an arrow like that and swiftly returned the projectile in the direction it had come from. His aim was flawless, and it hit a shadow lurking among the trees. The mysterious figure couldn't dodge it and, in their final moments, couldn't comprehend how Dalen had made such a precise shot. As the body fell lifeless to the ground, Dalen was already inspecting the surroundings. More enemies approached, grumbling that they should have ambushed him while he was sleeping. Dalen found this odd. His heightened senses should have picked up their approach. Then, a familiar face stepped forward. A mercenary Dalen had encountered before claimed that he had lost a companion. Mocking, the bald mercenary joked that it had been a while since he had seen that foolish girl too. Lucia, angered, called him ugly. Dalen quickly recognized him as the bald-headed man from earlier and demanded to know how long they had been followed. But the bald mercenary scoffed, saying it wasn't Dalen's business. He was there to settle the score from their tavern encounter. He then ordered his men to attack. Calm as ever, Dalen called over to Lucia, asking if she didn't deserve to hear testimony from someone who witnessed her comrade's last moments. Lucia hesitated as the image of Barrett flashed through her mind. She then gripped the hilt of her sword. With renewed resolve, she agreed, saying she indeed deserved to hear it. Now it was time for the two of them to show what happened to minor characters in a story filled with dismemberment. Dalen charged toward the first group of attackers. The fools shouted loudly for him to die, believing in the power of their positivity. Their swords clashed violently. Dalen and one of the fools exchanged a series of blows. After toying with him for a while, Dalen taunted that the fool was slower than the senile old man. The fool, on the other hand, couldn't understand how his opponent was so fast. While he pondered this, his head was slammed into the ground, cracking it beneath the impact. Dallin pressed the fool's head even harder into the dirt to make sure he wouldn't be getting back up. Nearby, another one of the fools stood paralyzed with fear, having witnessed the scene. Dallin slowly approached him like a villain from a horror movie, and the man stammered, begging him not to come any closer. But a sharp scream pierced the night air. He was now learning firsthand whether God existed. Meanwhile, Lucia took a deep breath to focus. A bright light enveloped her sword, and she invited the rest of the minor characters to attack her. One took the bait, arrogantly declaring that it didn't matter if she was a sacred knight. Bones were still bones, and his sword was brutal. But Lucia easily dodged, now airborne, mocking the chunk of metal the man called a sword. She remarked that he was slower than drunk infant. She unleashed a flurry of strikes while still in the air. Below, the mercenaries did their best to survive the onslaught. With a piercing, unrelenting blow, one of them lost a piece of his body. Lucia found it so easy that she scoffed, saying all they could do was talk, but when it came to fighting, they were useless. Dallin was pleased with her performance. She never ceased to surprise him. Frustrated, the bald mercenary called his lackeys useless bastards. Seeing the tide turning against him, he decided to slip away casually, hoping no one would notice. Dallin called out to Lucia, telling her to handle the second-rate minions while he went after the bald mercenary. What the man had done couldn't go unpunished. As Dallin pursued, one of the fools, in a desperate attempt to hasten his own death, attacked Dallin from behind. Dallin glanced back, incredulous at the audacity. He activated his jump ability, leaping so high he was out of reach, leaving the fool alive so Lucia could continue learning. Not far ahead, the bald mercenary fled, doing his best to escape the two monsters pursuing him. His panic was evident, with thick veins bulging from his shiny bald head. He believed he would one day get his revenge, but Dallin was already closing in. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed as Dallin landed right on top of him. Dallin called him pathetic for abandoning his companions. As Dallin pinned him down, a voice unexpectedly called out, surprising Dallin. There was another hidden figure among them. This mysterious figure asked Dallin to spare the rest of the fools from further slaughter. Dallin remained steadfast, uninterested in stopping the fight just because the mysterious figure had asked. He was motivated to teach anyone who pulled such stunts a harsh lesson. However, the bearded man remarked that Dallin seemed to be carrying a large chest, hinting that he couldn't let such an opportunity pass by without doing something. It was a tricky situation because Dallin had wanted to leave the chest with Sienna, fearing he might break it if he forced it open. But the bearded man, clearly clever, tried to buy his way out, offering a totem that canceled noise within a certain radius. Now things made sense.